Salut! Welcome to MegoxCast. I am your host, John, joined by.
Neil, John's brother-in-law living in Northwest Arkansas and a big fan of coffee.
Oh, yes, for this episode. Today, we will talk about coffee. Now, Neil, you've already talked a little bit, but talk a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so like I said, John's brother-in-law. I've known John for a long time. I can't count the years off the top of my head, but it's more than 10 and less than 20. Um, I've been married to Melissa, John's sister, for just over 10 years, almost 11 years, and we've known each other for a couple years before that. So I've known John since, he was a very small child, I guess I'd say. Um, so yeah, a bit of history there, and like I said in my intro, I've been living in not the same locale as John, but have been off in the middle of the country, kind of living our own lives, so to speak.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, we know each other. Just
Yes.
just wanted to let you guys know.
Yeah. There's
Um,
history.
all right. Yeah, I mean, yeah, history. History of coffee. Um, so Neil, like I just can't imagine that people have not been drinking coffee their entire our entire time as being a species. I don't even know what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're
So
saying. Yeah, yeah. It's for as widespread as coffee is now, it's hard to imagine a time where it was never part of, human existence. But um, there was a time, and it was actually not that long ago. Historically speaking, humans have been around for thousands of years, so um, long time. But I can't remember the exact time frame. I'm not a historian. I've not done a lot of research, so that there's my disclaimer. I'm just a big coffee nerd who's been into it for over a decade, and
for too
it's
long.
yeah, well, very very
Okay.
long, and it's just like it's one of my things. It's probably one of my biggest things, one of my biggest hobbies that I've kind of fallen in love with. So a few trees ago, I can't remember if it was around 4 or 500 or if it was 1400, 1500 AD, CE, Common Era, whatever, 500 to 1500 years ago kind of deal. The coffee was discovered by a goat farmer. This is kind of like the before I tell the story, this is kind of the apocryphal story of how coffee was discovered. I don't know if there's any actual like sources, like historical sources, or like any confirmation of this actually happening or documentation, but this is the story everybody tells, and it's a good story. It kind of hits right. It kind of sounds good. So a goat farmer was leading their sheep or leading their goats and sheep around the hills in Ethiopia and or Eastern Africa, what is now kind of Ethiopia, Kenya, and noticed that their goats were snacking on these bushes um, that were kind of human height, and big, and kind of kind of the size of a circle, and had nice pretty leaf stuff and some nice fruit and flowers. And the main thing was the farmer noticed the goats would be really hyperactive after like grazing on these plants, and the goats kept on wanting to wander towards where these plants were. So the farmer started to investigate, figured out that the goats were consuming the fruit of this plant, what is now known as coffee, or now what we now call coffee, and the farmer eventually started cultivating it, and the rest is history, so to speak. So, you know, the interesting thing about coffee is, it hasn't been around for, again, historically that long, but it has kind of infiltrated and found its way into almost every facet of human life. I mean, everybody knows what coffee is or drinks it. And if they don't drink coffee, they know they have a reason for not drinking coffee. It's one of the biggest commodity crops in the world, if not the biggest commodity crop. Billions of dollars of coffee are traded every year between producing countries and consuming countries, and vice versa. So it's It's a whole thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's weird that a goat farmer, you said that, right? Like a goat
Yeah,
farmer was the one that, kind of was the start of the coffee craze,
yeah. Just one person out there leading their goats, kind of just living their lives, and this discovery, and the inevitable goat farmer sharing their crop and their discovery with other people, and
Hmm.
propagating it that way. It didn't explode, onto the world scene, the same way that things happen now, because the world is interconnected. Back then, that goat farmer knew, you know, Jeff down the road, and that's probably the biggest connection that that farmer had. But generationally, that the cultivation and what is it? Cultivation and consumption of coffee gets passed down from goat farmer 1, goat farmer 2 to all of his friends and everyone in the neighboring village, et cetera, et cetera. And then eventually, I think sometime in the 1800s, coffee kind of gets discovered by modern colonists and traders. And then that's when it really gets brought up into Western Europe, and then what's the right word? I want to say propagated, but I feel like that's a weird word. Maybe it's the right word because it's kind of horticultural. Then it gets kind of propagated throughout Western Europe and becomes like a popular drink alongside tea. Not anywhere near as popular as tea, but coffee does kind of find its way into Western European um, culinary taste, I guess.
Yeah, they
Maybe
like
it
their
starts.
tea.
Yeah, they love tea, and I I don't think. I mean, there's a lot of Western Europeans who love coffee, but I think tea is kind of the dominant beverage still.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, from what I know, coffee did start or was like a lot of people drank it around the Enlightenment, from what
Hmm.
I know.
Yeah. That's kind of the era around which um, caffeinated beverages were starting to become more and more popular. Because people were actually learning how to read, people were becoming literate, and people had more access to written things and written words and all that kind of stuff. So um, yeah, coffee was beginning to um, grow in its popularity. That was kind of the
You bring up a good point when you're saying that, when you're saying like, oh, like they're starting to read and everything.
Mhm.
The drink of choice really before that, I know you're saying tea, but a lot of places they didn't really have clean water, so they would just drink from my knowledge, alcohol, or like, they would still drink water, but like alcohol was very heavily consumed before coffee from what I know.
Yeah,
I don't know
yeah,
if
yeah. So yeah,
yeah.
as far as like beverage history, yeah, like most, the world now, we kind of take clean water for granted in the West or in developed countries. But even in still some developing nations, you know, the remote village in Mongolia, or Central Africa, places that don't necessarily have modern technology or modern infrastructure, those places still aren't that interconnected into clean water. But one of the things about human beings is you can't survive without water for more than really 3 days. You start to dehydrate and all your bodily functions shut down. So you have to drink water. You have to stay hydrated, and if the water source near you is contaminated by whatever human waste or some other thing, or just contaminated by bacteria, or it's just not trustworthy, the way that people dealt with that was by mixing water with alcohol. So alcohol that was consumed hundreds of years ago, um, even thousands of years ago, um, wasn't consumed necessarily at the strengths, or like it wasn't like people were just taking shots of whiskey um, to get their hydration in 1,000 years ago. It was more like they would be drinking weak beers or weak ciders, 2, 3, 4% alcohol, but it was just enough to kind of clean up all like the microorganisms in the water. So that was everyone from old adults to very young children. Everyone was kind of drinking alcohol. Um, so human beings have been accustomed to drinking non-water beverages for a very long time, and it kind of
And we still
naturally.
get drunk.
Yeah, we still drink a lot of alcohol. So, um, yeah, it was kind of a natural thing for humans to pick up things like tea and things like coffee and other steeped um, and brewed beverages to kind of supplement their water intake because a lot of people are fine with drinking water, but a lot of people want to drink something other than water, even today.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. No, a lot of people don't want to just drink water, but it's a privilege that we didn't have back then, and some people don't have right now.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's
absolutely.
good. I was just gonna say that, I mean, you were talking about how, we were drinking it back then, and then, when the Enlightenment happened, I mean, we were reading more and all that, and I was just wondering, do you think there is a correlation between, like, do you think our main drink of choice, changed society in any way, or just changed how things operated?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think again, it's one of those things that I don't know if this is like scientifically or historically verifiable, but there is a lot of speculation that the advent of caffeinated beverages of like the Western Europe, the main industrial uh, pioneers, I guess, to say technological pioneers of the world, early pioneers of technology world, um, as the beverage of choice switched from alcohol to something that was caffeinated, namely, tea and coffee. People were less drunk all the time and more awake all the time. So, yeah, there has been some speculation that a lot of the progress that happened in the Enlightenment and Industrial Revolution, and in those big major human historical shifts, were due in part to people not being drunk all the time anymore. Because one of the things about drinking alcohol is you kind of lose mental faculties and you become really groggy and you become really tired, especially for people who drink lots of alcohol all the time. Um, and if you just aren't doing that, if you are, boiling your water with this other stuff and cleaning your water that way instead of cleaning it by drinking alcohol, then you're a little bit sharper mentally. You're able to process things, better than you would if you were inebriated. So yeah, there's definitely some correlation there between the shift in drinking alcohol to coffee or tea and industrial or technological progress hundreds of years ago, um, which is kind of a cool thing, that coffee or caffeinated beverages in a broader sense would um, kind of play a major part in human history like that, and still be playing a part in human history to this day. I mean, people still drink lots of coffee to get a lot of work done, for better or for worse. A lot of people take it too far, but it is still kind of one of the major things that people consume to help them focus or help them get more stuff done.
Yeah. And I mean, coffee and alcohol, they're both drugs, they're not just
Mm.
the drink of choice. Um, I don't know. The main reason I'm bringing this up because there's this guy on YouTube. He's game theory. Everyone knows who that is, but he has this other uh, thing where he does food theory. You know,
Hmm.
and he talks about that, and he was saying like, oh, it just changes. You know, like he just showed all the gradual changes from, when we started drinking like alcohol, then we started drinking coffee. And then he brought up a good point where, you know, uh coffee was banned for a while, like in some places for specific reasons. I don't really know, or they couldn't drink it, something like that. And I
Mm.
was gonna say that uh he predicted that like weed being legalized, it might change how things are, like more people
Oh
are,
yeah, yeah,
you know.
yeah, yeah. Kind of becoming more. Uh, more easily accessible, more consumable. So people are, the human population would naturally kind of move towards that drug versus, this, coffee, the stimulant, or, alcohol, the formerly very popular depressant. Still is very popular, but yeah, I mean, it kind of, I don't want to kind of get into the I don't want to call it politics, but like the argues for or against alcohol or marijuana, but like there are a lot of problems that alcohol brings to people's lives. Like that is undoubtedly, a fact of life. Alcohol abuse is responsible for so much suffering in the world. And relatively speaking, marijuana abuse is just not. So yeah, I could see that changing things, but I don't know how much the consumption of marijuana versus alcohol or marijuana versus coffee, it's in and of itself now could influence things in the world, just because there are so many things about human lives that are connected, and so many things about human lives these days that influence how they make decisions and how they work and what they do and where they go and all that kind of stuff. Back when the alcohol, the coffee to tea, coffee and tea transition was happening, the world was still very separated from each other. You couldn't travel very quickly. You had to take a boat and take 3 months to cross the Atlantic Ocean. That's not like a quick, 24-hour flight around the world. I could, if I wanted to, I could buy a plane ticket and go to China right now, and
Yeah.
completely
Would
different
you though?
place. No, absolutely not. No, I hate flying, and the idea of a flight that long just is terrifying. I would love to go to China. It'd be really cool to visit and experience things, but doing something like that as an American is like, I don't know. I'd want to spend a lot of time just because there's it kind of, after so much time, it morphs from like a touristy thing to like, oh, what's it like to actually be a part of this culture and um, live here. That's kind of the more interesting thing to me for places that are not Western or not English speaking. So I just can't spend a month in China. I when you have a kid, you can't do that. So
Oh no, I got you.
yeah.
I
So,
mean,
but kind of
yeah.
back to the original question. I could definitely see in the coming decades that the legalization of marijuana could influence productivity and technological advancement, just because people are in a capitalistic society. People are going to try to find ways to capitalize on profitable ventures surrounding this thing. So now that marijuana is more legally accessible than it was, even 10 years ago, people who were doing hydroponic farming might, hydroponic farming might become more popular, or more see more advancement, or certain farming techniques that are partial to growing marijuana versus growing whatever other crops that are grown in the U.S. In California or Oklahoma, where these states where recreational marijuana is legal and there's lots of farming. Oklahoma, you can't grow anything but cows, so people are figuring out ways to grow weed. So that's definitely, it's changing the economic landscape of that state alone. I bring up Oklahoma because I live next to the state. So, but wherever there are things for humans to kind of divert their attention, naturally there will be technological and industrial advancements to follow, just because someone's going to be wanting to try to make money off of that. So yeah, I think it'll change things, but I don't think it'll be as drastic as it once could have been, I guess.
Yeah, because I mean, what really? I mean, are people just gonna stop drinking like coffee as much as they are? No, probably not.
Yeah.
It's not like a drink of choice. It's still there. And
Yeah.
Weed is just more like a maybe just an influence or an influence and inciting incident to get things going.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and also like as far as consumption goes, like the consequence of consuming an alcoholic beverage or a couple alcoholic beverages is you shouldn't drive or operate heavy machinery, and you might say some things that you really shouldn't be saying. And on the normal end, but like on the extreme end, you drink a lot and you could cause a lot of damage to yourself and to other people. Um, Same thing for marijuana. Like the consequence of consuming a little bit, like eat a few gummies, smoke a couple bowls, whatever you do, is your 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 sensory experience, is such that you can't really again drive a car or operate heavy machinery. Like you kind of become incapacitated in a way with those with the depressant drugs, but with stimulants like coffee, especially stimulants as mild comparatively as caffeine is to other stimulants. The consequence of drinking 5 cups of coffee is your heart is racing and you might, have a panic attack. So drinking, coffee, I think is just gonna stick around and be part of people's lives because, it's kind of ritualistic for a lot of people. That it kind of became that way for me. Making coffee in the morning and that kind of stuff.
mhm.
Um, but it's just it doesn't like swing your perception or your ability to function so far off normal that you have to like replan your life around it like alcohol or weed could do. So um, yeah, I think drinking coffee is here to stay. And kind of getting back to the history point, like story of coffee, I guess, story of coffee in the world. Um, the the popularity of coffee growing larger and larger and larger and larger, essentially every year um, since it was discovered and brought into um, you know popular culture, kind of speaks to its hold, its grip on human lives and human rhythms. So, yeah, like kind of after coffee was kind of popularized during the Enlightenment and Europe continued to colonize the world. There, even in the last century or so, last 120 years, there have been these distinct movements um, of coffee, of coffee's popularity, I guess, or coffee's ubiquity in people's lives, that have been described as waves, kind of like first wave, second wave, third wave. And the waves are really talking about kind of the middle of the 20th century or early 20th century onward to modern day. Um, but that first wave would really be kind of that big popular coffee culture that really did start in Italy. Italians really kind of did have that hold on um, coffee culture for a long time. It really became popular there and became a part of everyone's lives. As coffee culture kind of incubated and grew in Italy, there was a point in U.S. history that coffee came here, and it was really in a post-war era, post World War II, that GIs were going to Europe to fight in the war, and they were getting used to drinking this brown sludgy beverage in the morning. So whenever they came back to the States, there was demand essentially. So wherever there is demand in a capitalistic society, there will be someone to give supply. So coffee in its earliest forms was kind of mass produced, um, Folger, Maxwell House, those brands. I know there's a couple other ones I'm thinking of, like a red and yellow label, but like those vacuum sealed blocks or bricks of coffee kind of thing, like pre-ground in a factory, mass harvested, mass roasted. No, not much care and attention
Yeah,
paid
that
to.
must taste really good.
Oh yeah. It's delicious stuff. But at the time, whenever that was kind of brought into American culture, and it's hard to speak about coffee as anything other than someone who grew up in America. So that's kind of how I speak about it. Even historically, whenever coffee was brought to the U.S., that was what coffee was. So like in that kind of economic booming era of post-war, post World War II America, coffee was the breakfast beverage. It kind of became the thing for people, and it was just a main part of life. But like I said, there wasn't a lot of care or a lot of intentionality with the cultivation or harvest or growing the best quality plant. It was more like where someone just was trying to find coffee farms or find places that were farming coffee already around the globe, which are kind of South Central America, Central Eastern Africa, and some Southeast Asian countries. Got coffee. Had coffee brought to them and was cultivated there. So wherever these people could find coffee, they would ship it into America and mass produce it for a lot of people. The second wave of coffee wasn't really until espresso culture was kind of brought into the U.S. Through the Pacific Northwest, really, I think. Again, not a historian, just kind of going off of what the research that I've done and what I've heard from various people who are more authoritative than me, but I'm not going to name drop anyone. But the second wave of coffee was kind of when espresso came. So if the first wave was kind of like your pot of coffee, you throw a couple cups of ground coffee out of this metal tin into this paper filter, and this thing will boil water over it for you, and then you get hot filter coffee and you serve it to your guests. That's kind of where coffee was for a few decades in American culture, and even around a lot of parts of the world. And again, the Italians coming through with developing the espresso machine, which I can get into that later. But once espresso culture and cafe or coffee shop culture was kind of imported to the U.S., that kind of started the second wave of coffee. So that was 70s, 80s, where you get Seattle's Best Coffee, you get Starbucks, you get all these big coffee shops kind of.
Yeah, I mean, like Starbucks. I think from what I know, Starbucks is
Mhm.
it's the character from Moby Dick or something like that, right?
Yeah. Oh, I'm not exactly sure I know who you're talking about. Oh, like the mascot or like the logo of Starbucks
Oh no, the name. Yeah, there's some guy in
in the story Moby
sorry.
Dick.
Yeah, in Moby Dick, yeah. I'm gonna try not to say that too many times in this podcast for
It's the
YouTube.
name of a book.
It is, it is.
Uh,
So
I
please,
have to admit I've never read the book, so
I
uh
don't blame you. That thing is
yeah,
like 500
it's a
pages.
tome. Yeah, it's very long, and it's older English than I speak, so it's not as easy to read. It's not that
Yeah.
old. It's not Shakespearean or anything, but
Oh yeah,
um,
but still.
I haven't read a lot of like classical English literature, so
Yeah.
um, yeah. I mean, there could be a character named Starbuck or Starbucks.
Yeah, and I think
Um,
that's where the name came from. I think they wanted that
Interesting.
name because it was like they wanted it to sound like a seaport or something like that because
Uh-huh.
Seattle,
Yeah, that
and they
makes a lot of
wanted like
sense.
a yeah, they also wanted like a harsh name so that like you would remember it more, like that
Yeah.
sound.
Yeah,
And
yeah, with those like big like snappy kind of sounds like the
yeah,
Starbucks. Yeah. Yeah, it's like kind of you say it and you can't really, forget those
yeah.
sounds in that order. Yeah.
And most people can't like live without it, and it's funny because
Mhm.
it's a siren mascot, and
Yeah,
those
I
things are
know. That's
known to just attract the sailors
attract the weary sailor.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then they
Attract
would
the weary
just get
sailor and then you'll ultimately drown
killed,
them, but yeah.
drown them with caffeine, or
Yeah.
coffee.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
What would you say was after that though? Or you think that's kind of more just modern times at this point?
so that was kind of like, 70s, 80s, the
Yeah.
coffee shop as the coffee shop as like an American institution or like a Western world institution, a business solely for the majority of that business is dedicated to preparing and serving coffee. Oftentimes it's along, in other business or other places, it's alongside, lunch foods like sandwiches, salads, that kind of stuff, or baked goods. But the coffee shop as an institution, that was really kind of the advent of that, and the bringing of espresso to the U.S. That's not where it ended, though. There is a third wave, and kind of even I haven't been in the coffee world recently, so I don't know how the current era of coffee is talked about. But after the second wave is the third wave. Fun enough. Um, so the third wave of coffee is kind of where I got into it. It was the most interesting one to me personally. And the third wave of coffee was when people started caring about preparation and cultivation of coffee. So on the cultivation side, people started taking a lot of time to invest in farmers and farms and farming practices, and
Mhm.
paying farmers a fair price for their crop, instead of paying them the cheapest possible amount they could pay for their crop. Um, so that's kind of on the cultivation side, making sure that um, coffee as a plant is grown properly, is taken care of as it's grown, diseases are dealt with, pests are dealt with, and after the growth is, coffee has to be processed before it can be turned into a beverage, and the processing becomes a point of interest for people. And then, like I said, preparation, that's kind of like the us side of it, is the barista at the cafe, and then you, the consumer, me, the consumer. Preparation started to get this kind of scientific analysis, like obsession, from a lot of people around the world, namely Western developed countries. And um, that's really when coffee kind of hit this thing that's called kind of the specialty era or we call it specialty coffee. It's kind of the differentiating factor between the second wave and the third wave, where some coffee companies in the U.S. Um, talk about how they pay the coffee farmers, talk about going to the farm and sourcing the coffee and building a relationship with the farmer, so they're not just kind of exploiting these farmers in these developing nations who they don't have any livelihood other than cultivating this coffee crop. Like, they can't just say, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm going to go to college and get a software engineering degree and work for Google. Like, that's not an option for these people. Like, they grow up in an agricultural, like, rural area. They can farm coffee, or they can move to the city away from their entire family. Like, there's not a lot of options for these people, so it's kind of a big deal for them to not be taken advantage of, and for them to be invested in. Because when you invest in them, it helps. You spend more money on the raw coffee. You get more money. They can work on their farms. They can build a better life for their children, and their communities also flourish, while we consume what is to just us a beverage. So, that's kind of the cultivation side, and then the preparation side again is taking a magnifying glass to every single movement, every single thing you're doing while you're making that cup of coffee, and trying to make it better, trying to understand what's going on, and how to make it work, to make ultimately a tastier cup of coffee. So that's kind of like the three waves of coffee, and like it the third wave kind of started around, I don't know, 2000 maybe. I'll say around 2000. So, like, if the waves were like the 40s, 50s, and then 70s, 80s, and then around Y2K. That's kind of the major historical shifts in the development of coffee culture and coffee as a beverage. And that kind of takes us to today, where we've been in this specialty coffee era for 20 years or more. And it's not to say that the things that happened with the first wave, bringing kind of that mass-produced commodity, bulk brewed, generic quality coffee, that still exists. Gas station coffee still exists. Cheap bulk coffee at the grocery store still exists. For the second wave, Starbucks is still around, Pete's is still around, Seattle's Best is still around. Those cafes still exist, and they still make a lot of money, and there are a lot of people who prefer that style of coffee. And then specialty cafes have just become more and more popular around the U.S. and the world. Like, kind of feels like at this point, you go to any major city in the U.S. and just Google coffee shop, and you're gonna find dozens of specialty coffee shops, whether or not they're actually doing the coffee buying and kind of the cultivation side themselves. They are for sure doing that meticulous preparation side themselves.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's a lot has happened over the course of, like, you know that just last century, that
Yeah.
we just kind of, can't imagine it without, just, the iced coffees and the, cold
Yeah.
section store and stuff like that, and just how easy it is
Yeah.
to. Mhm.
Yeah,
'Cause,
and I
yeah.
I even wrote in my notes like the rise of specialty and post specialty. And I wrote post again, I'm not a historian, I'm not authoritative, but I feel like just me, Neil, my feelings are that we're almost in like a post specialty kind of era where like the specialty cafe is like, we know what that is. We've got it. We've figured it out. And I just don't know what kind of comes after that. People are there are people in the coffee industry that are continuing to push the envelope on, how good coffee can be, how much they can help develop relationships with farmers, developing new technology for brewing coffee and making coffee, new technology that makes their cafes more efficient or more environmentally friendly. There's the specialty coffee movement, or like the specialty coffee era, is kind of moving forward on all these different fronts, but there inevitably will be a post specialty fourth wave kind of deal, and I'm not really sure where that's going to go or what that's going to be. But you mentioned it, is like, you can buy good cold brew at the grocery store, and you have to choose from like 15 different brands. 5 years ago, you couldn't find cold brew anywhere except a specialty nobody knew what cold brew was 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. It's kind of crazy how fast that that type of coffee has made it into American culture, Western culture. Like, I have cold brew concentrate in my fridge right now. Like, I've known about cold
I'm
brew
addicted.
for yeah, and it's great. It's tasty, and it's like usable in so many different ways. It's so versatile. I love it. So yeah, I'm kind of curious to see what this next wave or this next era of coffee will be. I'm not sure
Weed
where we're
coffee.
headed. Yeah. There's what is it? CBD coffee. Yeah, like, whenever I was working at a cafe, there was a guy who was trying to sell me, like, he was like trying to be like, oh dude, like, I sell CBD, like, we should make some CBD coffee. And I was like, yeah man, like, I don't know how that's ever gonna work, but I'm sure there's people doing it.
Yeah.
No
But
doubt.
yeah, I mean, do you have anything else you'd like to say about the history of coffee? You want to go to the next topic?
No, I think I covered as much as I really could possibly know.
Oh, that's fine. All right, then biology of coffee. I mean, before this, everyone says it's like a bean. It's
Yeah.
like the beans means the magical fruit, you know what I'm saying? But I mean, I
Yeah,
get the magical fruit, you know. So I guess it is a. I mean, I guess that's what the song was talking about. You
yeah,
know,
yeah. The
they're
song was
talking
talking
about
about
coffee.
coffee all along.
But
Yeah,
I mean, I
that's
guess people do toot after coffee. I would assume so. So
yes, yeah, yeah. The post coffee poops is a real thing. It's the stimulant effect. But yeah, that's kind of the 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 great cultural strange thing about coffee is somehow roasted coffee started to become or be called beans, and I don't really know where that comes from. I'm sure there's probably some interesting historical study to be done there of like when did English speaking people start calling coffee beans, because like they're not beans. They're not even like genetically and like biologically speaking, coffee is not close, even remotely close to being a bean. Um, Coffee as a plant is it's a bush. It's a big bush, very beautiful waxy green leaves, um, and then it grows these you know very very pretty dainty star looking flowers that are fruiting bodies, and they turn into coffee cherries. And coffee in its plant form is kind of just like a cherry. It's a stone fruit, and the thing that we call coffee beans are the seeds of that fruit. So each coffee cherry has two seeds in it that look like a coffee bean. They're not roasted when they come out of the coffee cherry, but um, they're these hard little green seeds, and uh, coffee gets processed. Those seeds get taken out in different ways, um, and then they get roasted in big roasters at high temperatures, which kind of breaks them down a little bit and makes their innards more accessible to brewing. So
doesn't
it's
sound
real.
scary at all.
No, it doesn't. Um, yeah, it's kind of. I've always kind of thought it was funny that people call it beans. Like I don't like to correct people and say like, oh no, coffee's a fruit, it's seeds. I just I let people say what they say, and I just whenever people talk about coffee, they're always trying to connect. That's kind of like the main thing with coffee. Is like coffee's a big connector for people.
It brings people
It
together, you know.
brings people together. So I don't like to I don't like to be a gatekeeper. I don't like to be like, oh no, it's a seed. You have to start calling it seeds. Like I don't care what you call it. Like I know what you're talking about. You know what you're talking about. We're just here to talk about coffee. So call it beans if you want to call it beans. Call it seeds. I think it's funny to call it hot roasty seeds, because people are like, what are you talking about? It's just like it's a way to start a conversation. So like I don't correct people, but I like to make jokes. I like to have fun with it. So I talk about hot seeds or roasty seeds all the time, and
Yeah,
people are
those
like,
are
what do you
hot
mean?
seeds.
Yeah, I got some hot seeds coming. So hot seed water.
Ooh.
Um, so yeah, coffee's a bushy plant. I think I think coffee plants only grow to like maybe 10 feet tall. Um, I mentioned in passing earlier they have to be grown at in certain regions of the world. They don't have to be grown, but they're only grown in certain regions of the world just because they have to be grown at kind of a higher elevation, usually around a few thousand feet above sea level. So 2,000-3,000 feet above sea level or higher. So mountainous terrain. So that would be mountainous Central and South America. Um, some mountains in Southeast Asia, Central Africa, that just
Once it heats up, Alaska.
yeah, yeah. Once climate change is around its course, we'll be able to grow coffee in Alaska, Antarctica, all the icy places. But it's kind of a general thing. Growing conditions don't have to be above sea level. It's just that the moderation of temperature and the swings that happen are less extreme in certain places at that elevation. So that's where coffee is grown. But then you have coffee growing in places like Hawaii where it's tropical. So it's not necessarily that it's a rule that coffee has to be grown at high elevations. It's more that higher elevations kind of are the moderation of temperature and the moderation of humidity, and just kind of the right growing conditions for coffee. Same kind of thing in Southeast Asia. All the places that coffee is grown, like in Indonesia, or Sumatra, it's not necessarily that it's on high up in mountains, but mountains help, I guess. So whenever you read coffee bags from specialty coffee roasters, sometimes they'll have their whole thing about what do you call it? Their whole thing about how what elevation it's grown at. That's kind of a data point that some people will advertise on their coffee bags, so to speak.
Yeah, the coffee bags that are coffee seeds inside. Hot coffee
Yeah. Got the hot roasty coffee seeds. So
Yeah. I was gonna say when you're saying that it's kind of like a cherry. I
Mhm.
was thinking about how I think people talk about drinking cherry juice before bed because it like helps
Hmm.
you sleep or something.
Yeah,
I don't know what that's all about, and
I don't know either.
it's I don't know. I just find it funny because people usually drink coffee to stay awake. So I
Yeah,
don't know. I thought that was interesting,
yeah.
but
I think they're just called cherries, just because it just looks like a cherry. Like if you look up if you just Google coffee cherries, like they're whenever they ripen, they start out when they're fruiting, they start out green and they can turn yellow, orange, red. They can get this like red or like really really deep burgundy once they're
yeah.
ripe, and they
Um,
are they have fruity flesh, and if you ate the flesh, it would kind of taste fruity um, for the most part. So it is kind of like you could just eat the fruit.
have you had the fruit before?
I have not. No, I haven't. I haven't been anywhere close to a fruiting coffee plant.
Dang.
Um, it's very hard to grow coffee in the continental U.S. There are places, I know. I actually think there's a farm, like a small operation in Santa Barbara, that started doing coffee plant or coffee cultivation um, in a high enough volume to like start selling it. But I don't know if I don't know how that's going. I heard about it like years ago, so I don't know if they're still in business or not. But I know in California, in Southern California, you can technically grow a coffee plant. Um, the thing
But
about
will
it,
it be
though,
good?
yeah, that's the thing is part of what makes coffee farms the way to get good coffee is the interaction between the coffee and the other crops that are planted around the coffee. These farmers don't just farm coffee; they can farm other fruits, other tropical fruits and stuff. Bananas, mangoes, whatever's like native to their region, and the interaction between bees pollinating and that kind of stuff, and like different soil conditions. Um, that does change how the coffee tastes. So you just planting a coffee tree or a coffee bush in a pot and then growing it, with not a lot of care for how it turns out is not really going to yield you good coffee in the end. But I guess the bonus is you would get to try coffee cherry
Yeah.
after a few years. It takes like years, like 3-4 years for a coffee to start flowering and producing fruit. So um, not only is it probably not that easy to keep alive, you don't get anything for a few years. And then the amount of yield you get out of one plant, like you're not even going to be able to make one cup of coffee, maybe. So the
Yeah,
the
those
effort
people that
expended is not not worth it.
mass produced it in like the 1950s or something, they must have
Hmm.
like not cared. Like there would have probably been a bunch of like uh just growing stuff out here unless they grew it out there and then like after they
Yeah, it
grew
was
it
that.
it sucked.
Yeah, it was that kind of thing where they were just finding coffee farmers all around the world and then just paying them the least amount of money they could um, to get
Which
the
is
most amount of
always
coffee possible.
yeah.
There's still companies that do that. There's still companies that buy and sell coffee at the cheapest possible price, and that's kind of what they do. So since we're talking about that, I wanted to bring up kind of the commodity market or the commodity price of coffee.
All right.
Um, and and there's one roaster that's local to me. They're called Onyx Coffee. They're awesome. They make really good coffee. They do really cool things. They're pushing the coffee industry forward. It's very unexpected that a cafe out of Northwest Arkansas would kind of be on the cutting edge of coffee culture in the world. But here we are. So one of the things that they do advertise is what they pay for coffee and how that cost is broken down, and what the price of coffee around the world was at the time. So on one of their, they have a few like house blends, I guess I'll just say it that way. On one of the more popular ones that they use for a lot of their stuff, the commodity price of coffee when they purchased I guess when they purchased their most recent, or when they most recently updated this page, was $2.30 a pound. They paid for this particular coffee $9.73 a pound, which is a very, very big difference to what some other roasters and producers will pay. And granted, that 973 is broken down into, most of it is production, so that's on their end. But the cost of the green coffee, so I mentioned this earlier, the seeds come out, they're like hard little green seeds. Green coffee is essentially processed but unroasted coffee. It's kind of how you buy it from whatever these producing countries are: Colombia, Ethiopia, Kenya, Brazil, wherever. The green cost of the coffee was $4.19, so that's almost double what the commodity price was. So you have these big multi-million-dollar giants in America like Folgers and Maxwell House that are buying coffee at commodity prices, and commodity prices are like, they're enough to kind of sustain the communities and farmers that are farming that coffee, but there's not a lot of extra money there. There's not enough profit for those farmers to develop their farming methods to make the coffee better. So on like the coffee scale of quality, it's I can't remember what like the what it's called, but there's like a scale of 1 to 100. Anything below a certain number is commodity coffee, and anything above a certain number is specialty. I think above 80 or above like 78 is specialty. Commodity coffee is everything that's below specialty. So for this cafe to be paying almost double for their green coffee means that they're paying more than what they could be, and that is also helping build that relationship and to help those farmers produce better coffee. So that $4.19 was their green cost. Commodity price was $2.30, so almost double. And then Onyx's price, their final price, was $9.73. So the $9.73 is $4.19 green, 9 cents for transportation per pound. They put thousands of kilograms of coffee on a ship, and they have it shipped from wherever to America. So the more you ship, the less it costs. And then $5.45 in production costs, and that gets broken down into that's literally overhead of running a business, packaging, roasting, labor. It's all that stuff that, and then, the barista who makes it for you. So one of the cool things about Onyx as a company is they tell you what they're paying for a pound of this coffee. So it kind of, I guess it makes the pill easier to swallow whenever you're paying whatever price they're charging for whatever the coffee is. They charge $18.50 for a 10-ounce bag of coffee. So that's, I can't do the math right now. They sell a 2-pound bag for $49. So let's say $24.50 a pound. They're a business. They have to make money. They have to grow their business. So for them to make $15 off the pound of coffee, that's, not terribly price gouging, but, they're still able to run their business and do that and kind of do this other stuff. So that's kind of the spiel of bulk commodity coffee versus specialty.
Well, for good coffee, like some people will pay anything.
Yeah. I mean, there are some coffees that Onyx buys that are only able to be produced in very, very small quantities due to their difficulty or their sensitivity to growing environment and stuff, or just the rarity of a proper growing environment for that particular coffee variety. Like one of the coffees I had pulled up was this Panama El Burro Geisha naturally processed coffee, and this coffee is $150 for a 10-ounce bag, and they only sell 10-ounce bags. So that's like their retail price. If you're like a wholesale partner, I'm betting that's probably closer to $100 for a 10-ounce bag or $120. But still, $150 for a 10-ounce bag of coffee. You're only going to get a dozen cups of coffee out of that. So, that's a $10 cup of coffee for you. And I'm pretty sure you can get this in their cafes right now, and it's like $12 or $13 for the cup of coffee. So, some people are willing to pay it.
Yes. I know we all know you are, so that's good.
Yeah, I've definitely. I don't usually buy bags of coffee that are this expensive, but if a cafe is going to make it, and I want a cup of filter coffee, then I will pay $15 or $20 for that cup of coffee and not even bat an eye, because I know that it's expensive to buy and it's difficult to make properly. And if they think that they're gonna be able to buy it, roast it, and prepare it well, then I'd like to give it a shot. And disclaimer and spoiler alert, it's not 10 times better than a $3 or $5 cup of coffee from the same cafe. It's better, it's different, but it's not like it's not life changing.
Yeah,
it's just interesting if you're a nerd about it, and I am.
Coffee.
So yeah, it's still, at the end of the day, it's still just hot bean juice. It just tastes like different flowers and different fruits.
So, did you have anything else you'd like to say about the biology of coffee, or did you want to go on to the next topic?
I had one more thing to talk about that I
Alright.
wrote down, and it's coffee processing. So I wasn't sure where to talk about this, but this section kind of makes sense because I'm talking about coffee is like, it's a fruit, it's got seeds in it. So, but like talking about imagining a bush with a fruit and seeds doesn't really translate to the coffee beans that you buy and get home, or at your local cafe. Coffee, when it's harvested, has to be processed, and there's really two main ways that coffee is processed, and processing is kind of like a key vocabulary word in coffee. There's natural process, which is kind of one end of a spectrum, and then there's wash process, which is the other end of the spectrum. And there are multiple different ways to process coffee kind of in between. Just as a kind of a quick and dirty way to describe those things, the natural process is when you harvest the coffee cherries off the plant, and then you spread those cherries out on concrete patios or on raised beds, with the cherry still on the seed, and then you let that cherry ferment and dry on the seed before taking off. So that's the natural way of processing coffee. It's almost as if you take the cherries off the plant and then you just let them sit there naturally ferment, and then you take the fruit off once it's easier to wash off.
Turn
So that's
into a
natural.
raisin.
Yeah, exactly. It's like making a little coffee raisin, and that kind of yields its own distinct flavor profiles and different cup qualities for that type of coffee. And then on the very other end of the spectrum, I said, was washed processing. So wash processing is if you take the coffee cherries off of the plant and then you immediately take that fruit off. So the fruit is there's different ways to wash coffee, but the main thing is the fruit is taken off of the coffee seeds before they are dried, air dried, and then packaged up to sell to roasters before it's roasted. So this is kind of the first step between coffee plant and roasted bag of coffee beans or coffee seeds. So coffee has to be processed, natural process, wash process. And there's benefits and drawbacks to both of them. On the processing side, for the farmer, benefits and drawbacks to the person who's consuming the coffee, as far as like cup qualities, flavor profiles, and all that sort of stuff. So one's not better than the other. They're just different things. And like I said, there's kind of different steps in between those on the spectrum of coffee processing, where some people will let the fruits ferment for 36 hours and then they'll wash it, or something that's kind of become hip and cool in high end in like a fancy specialty coffee roasters or shops is doing kind of like extending that fermentation period. So what they do is they'll take the coffee cherries, and they will put those in like airtight bags and let them lacto ferment for 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time, instead of like the normal like 3, 4, 5 days for a natural process coffee, just to see what happens. Essentially, they put them in anaerobic environments, which means they suck all the oxygen out of the bag that they put the cherries in, and then let them ferment. It's a different thing. It's almost like a third processing method, but I would really just say it's part of the natural process. It's just a different way to do it. And I've had some coffees like that, and it does make a big difference. As long as everything that happens afterwards is done well, roasting and preparation. So, yeah, processing coffee. It's a whole thing. So that's done on the farm level. So once farmers harvest their crop, they process it, and then they get those processed coffee seeds, those green seeds, packaged up in big bags, and that's kind of what your coffee buyers will go and buy. I think they're like 25 to 55 kilo bags of green coffee seeds, and they buy a lot of them at a time, container ships full of coffee seeds. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know there's this many ways of processing, coffee.
Yeah, and all that happens before it ever even gets to you.
Yeah, that's insane, bro.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Did you want to go to the next topic?
Yeah. So the natural transition from processing coffee is into preparing coffee. So there's kind of like I was kind of talking about the steps from coffee bush, coffee plant to your coffee cup. There's quite a few there. Harvesting, growing and harvesting is one. Processing is the next one. But then the next one, which I think belongs in the preparation because it's done, outside of the farm, is roasting. So roasting is a whole thing. I've never even gotten into roasting myself. I always thought buying a roaster is a very, very expensive thing to do. There are cheap roasters out there, but to do it well, you'd have to spend multiple thousands, sometimes $10,000 or $15,000 on a roaster, or work at a cafe that will train you to be a roaster. And those opportunities just never came up for me. So it was not something I ever got into. But kind of like a basic overview of what roasting is. The green coffee seeds will be thrown into a big drum roaster usually, which is essentially just a big metal body with a drum inside of it that spins. So it kind of like it spins and it kind of rotates the coffee around. So it makes sure that it doesn't stay in one spot. It rotates the coffee and it kind of waterfalls over itself. So no one coffee seed stays in one spot. And then in the bottom, it's heated by either gas or propane flames, or I think there are some roasters now that are doing like electric infrared or gas infrared heat. So instead of like direct flames kind of heating the coffee, the roasting drum, it'll be the flames or electricity heating like a ceramic element that radiates infrared heat. And I, don't know what the reasons for that are, but I know that if you try to, if you're using a gas roaster, you've got to have a way to have gas, and then you've got to have an exhaust, because whenever you're burning gas, you always have to have a way to exhaust the fumes and the crap that kind of comes off the coffee. So like as coffee is roasted, it turns from this like tiny little hard green seed and starts to turn that toasty caramely brown that everyone knows and loves. And it smells really, really, really good. Coffee roasteries smell amazing when coffee is being roasted. But what's really happening is all the sugars and stuff in the green coffee seed are caramelizing, and different flavor compounds are being broken down and created, and other things are being burned off, and that kind of is the first stage at which the coffee shop or the cafe or the roaster is putting their signature on that individual coffee, because there are certain farms out there that produce lots and lots of coffee that sell to different coffee shops around the world, and different cafes will have their own way of roasting, their own roasting profiles. It's kind of, roasting is its whole own thing where you could nerd out about it for a lifetime, essentially, and learn how to do it and get better at it. Just the same as preparing or brewing coffee is its own kind of nerdy thing that you can explore forever. So that's kind of like the first step in preparation. Is a roaster will roast coffee, and then once the coffee is roasted, that's when the main. I don't want to say main because it's not more or less important. The more known or more commonly understood part of preparation happens, and that's when people take roasted coffee beans and they brew coffee with them. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. So it's kind of an interesting thing. All coffee really is, whenever people talk about coffee as a beverage, is just water and coffee. The different ways that coffee is prepared, they all involve those two things. Water as a solvent to dissolve some stuff out of the coffee beans. You grind the coffee beans, so you have to have a grinder to break it up into small pieces. But every single brewing method, every single way that people consume coffee is just running water through coffee. It's kind of the same idea as tea. Whenever tea is harvested, it's processed in its own ways, and then all tea is water and tea leaves. And there's different ways to do that. There's different ratios of water to tea, and there's different ratios of water to coffee. But in the coffee world, it's just you take water, you take hot water, you put it over coffee, and it dissolves some stuff in the coffee, and hopefully the beverage you've got at the end dissolved enough of the good tasting stuff and as little of the bad tasting stuff as possible, and it's pleasurable to drink. A lot of people don't like the way coffee tastes naturally, and I could get into reasons for that. We can talk about that later in the when we talk about preferences. But whenever if coffee is grown not properly, if coffee is grown intentionally, processed intentionally, if it's roasted well and prepared well, black coffee isn't necessarily that bad of a beverage. Relatively speaking to all the other beverages that people drink. It is a bitter drink, just like it. People complain about coffee being bitter. It is bitter, but there are a lot of coffees out there that have more sweetness than bitterness naturally. More fruitiness, more florality, more interesting flavor notes that you just don't get if you start adding stuff to the coffee. So, a lot of these specialty cafes will kind of push or insist on you trying or you drinking the coffee, and it's not natural, but in its like kind of raw, unadulterated, unamended form, no milk, no cream, no sugar. Mm-hmm. Before you start adding stuff to it, just so you can see if you like it that way. And for a lot of people that have like kind of tried that experiment on, like, hey, just try this. Just try this way. More people are pleasantly surprised how it is, and it kind of is like oh, I didn't know it would taste like that. I'm still gonna put cream in it, but it's still like they have the opportunity to be like, try it for what it is before they add a bunch of stuff to it, which is kind of cool. You get people down that road. Yeah, we're gonna ask.
Do you have anything else?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Different brewing methods. So, the main two brewing methods are going to be filter coffee and then espresso. And espresso is kind of its own category because it requires a machine that creates pressure. There are espresso machines out there that are manual espresso machines where you just kind of use your arm or like use a lever to create the pressure. But the main difference between espresso and filter coffee is espresso is coffee brewed in a pressurized environment, and that kind of does certain stuff to the fats and oils and dissolvable solids in the coffee. And filter coffee is kind of like the regular, like kind of coffee pot pour over, pouring hot water over, a bed of coffee preparation. And that type of coffee brewing has a myriad of brewing vessels and techniques and all sorts of stuff. But the most common one that I think my dad introduced me to whenever I was like, I don't know, 10, 11, or 12. Like I just saw this thing in his house and he told me what it was. It's called the Melita, and it's this it's a cone brewer that is it kind of elongated on two sides. So it's a cone, it's like a round like cone shape, but it has two flat sides. That's kind of makes it long. And that is I think has been around for a long time as far as like a filter coffee, like single filter coffee cup brewer. But Mr. Coffee pots are ubiquitous. Almost everybody has one or has owned one at some point. If they have, if they've ever lived in an apartment or anything, like lived on their own. But a lot of people buy coffee pots because you can buy them for like $20 at Walmart, and they do a very basic, very rudimentary job at brewing coffee. And if that's what gets you up for class in the morning, then that's a worthwhile investment at the time. So that's kind of the most basic filter coffee, and then filter coffee brewer, and then there's all sorts of crazy things that have come out in the last 10, 20 years as far as like specialty filter coffee brewers, but they're all essentially variations on a cone. They're all essentially taking ground coffee, putting it in a thing, and then pouring hot water over it. And then you get this kind of thinner, more diluted coffee beverage at the end. But that's like the thing that most people know as coffee. The thing with espresso, like I was saying, when espresso is brewed under pressure, it gives you a more concentrated coffee at the end, but ultimately it is still passing water through coffee. So another misconception about coffee is that espresso, or some people say espresso, Italians say espresso, so I don't ever like correct anybody. It's spelled with an S in English, so just say espresso. The popular misconception with espresso is that it's a certain roast profile or it's a certain type of coffee seed or coffee bean. It's just not. It's just a brewing method. So it's just a different way to prepare coffee. So there are roasters, Starbucks is guilty of this, who have branded bags of coffee espresso roast. And that has kind of led to the general confusion about what espresso is. But yeah, it's just a brewing method. So the cafes may have an espresso roast or have a roast that they use specifically for espresso. That's pretty common. Onyx has multiple coffees. They actually, for a time, they've switched away from this. For a time, they had like a coffee that they use for just batch brewed filter coffee. If the big coffee pot that you kind of see at like a gas station that holds like 2-3 gallons of brewed coffee. That's what I call batch brew. They had one coffee for batch brew, 2 or 3 coffees for espresso, for specific size of espresso drinks, certain espresso drinks, and then what do you call it? And then they had like a decaf option, and then those espresso blends could be used for different things. But they've kind of switched away from that, and now they just have their 3 or 4 blends, and they use them for all sorts of things. They use them for batch brew and for espresso. So they have a specific way of blending and roasting coffee for their cafes and how they like to prepare coffee. That's kind of interesting. So yeah, those are kind of like the 2 main ways that coffee is prepared. And then when people make filter coffee, they normally just drink that with cream and sugar, or they just drink it black. With espresso, a lot of the times people don't just drink straight espresso. It is a very concentrated drink, so it is an acquired taste. It takes a while to get used to drinking something like that. So the way that most people drink espresso is in the form of a latte. That's kind of the most common drink that people get. Ice lattes, hot lattes. The infamous Starbucks caramel macchiato is probably a lot of people's first entry into the espresso and milk game, as it were.
Yeah.
It was for me.
That's definitely not a like a real macchiato.
Yeah. There's a much heated debate between Starbucks using that word and whether or not they should or not. But they've kind of gotten away around it, and yeah, you're right. A traditional macchiato is not what Starbucks makes, but they started calling it, or someone started calling it a latte macchiato.
Yeah.
Which I don't know. It's a latte. It's
basically because
espresso with a ton of milk. So
yeah, the
it's
reason
just call it what it is.
yeah, the reason it's more like a latte is, it's just because it's to market, right? So
Yep.
it's a market with like just a little bit of like milk foam or cream, but no,
Yeah.
it's what they do is mark the foam or
Yeah,
cream
they
with
do the
the
opposite.
espresso.
Yeah, with the coffee, exactly.
And
Yeah,
that's just a latte basically.
which is that's technically that's like the letter. It's like following the letter of the law, but like not the spirit of the law.
Yeah,
It's like
exactly.
the spirit of the law is an espresso, a single or a double espresso with a little bit of milk foam. It's like a small beverage. Uh,
Just get a cappuccino.
To say it's marked with, technically, yeah, a latte macchiato is marked with coffee instead of being marked with milk. It's just, what one of the I don't hate on Starbucks too much because there are a few miracles of modern cafes that Starbucks is responsible for, and one of them is propagating this idea of consistency and this principle of consistency across cafes. One of the big miracles about Starbucks is they have systematized their cafes in such a way, and their supply chain in such a way, and their production, their factories that make their syrups and their sauces and whatever in such a way that if you buy a caramel macchiato in Los Angeles, and you buy a caramel macchiato in New York, and you buy a caramel macchiato in Dubai, and you buy a caramel macchiato in Shanghai, they are all going to taste the same. And that is an absolute miracle. There's no way that every cafe can do something like that, and it takes a lot of money and a lot of research and development to create a supply chain, to create a company that can do something like that. So that is like the area in which I applaud Starbucks. Also, the fact that they're kind of everywhere, and they are most people's first foray into something other than the coffee that their parents brewed.
Yeah.
So
And
it's
pretty
kind
good.
of it's not bad. It's it's not the best coffee in the world, but it's also still pretty good quality coffee. I think technically, I was talking about the grading of coffee earlier. Of if it's above a certain number, it's specialty, and if it's below a certain number, it's commodity. Starbucks does actually buy specialty grade coffee, but it's like on the low end of it. So, and their roast profiles and how they roast coffee is in such a way that you don't taste a lot of the nuances of where they're buying their coffee from or how the coffee was processed. They roast on the darker side of everything. Yeah. Even their blonde coffee is pretty darkly roasted and tastes like darker roasted coffee. Whereas if you bought a light coffee, like a light roasted coffee from like a specialty coffee roaster in like a Scandinavian country or Australia, their light coffees are so light. They are so light. It's like they barely roasted it at all. But Starbucks blonde coffee, which is like their light roast, is like kind of like the medium dark of like a specialty roaster. But they do what they do.
They try their best.
And yeah, they try their best. So yeah, like you brought up the macchiato thing.
Yeah.
I was also going to say, Starbucks is a genius at marketing, and they took that Italian sounding word and attached it to that drink, and they sell tons of them. And all it is vanilla syrup with a lot of milk and some espresso in it. And let me tell you, I know how much vanilla syrup and milk costs, and it's not a lot. And they charge $6 for one of those. So they're doing
That's how they get you.
what they can as a business. Yeah, it's how they get you.
Yeah.
But more to the traditional macchiato thing. As far as like coffee preparation goes, the way that most coffee is served in cafes is just cafes there. You go to a cafe because they make espresso. It's very difficult to make espresso at home. Unless you have a lot of money, and then you can buy an espresso machine and then spend a lot of time going through tons and tons and tons of coffee, lots of dollars in coffee to kind of make it almost as good as they can make it in a cafe in 30 seconds. So cafes are where you go to get espresso. So the way that they prepare those drinks is really all the difference between different espresso drinks in a cafe is just the amount of milk that goes into the drink. So a lot of people think that if I order the larger beverage, I will get more coffee. But in pretty much every specialty shop I've been to, that is not the case. There's not more coffee in bigger beverages. As you get to a certain beverage size, there will, there can be, like at Starbucks, I know they do single shots in their in their tall hot drinks. Unless they've changed that. Whenever I worked there back in 2015, we were doing single shots in talls, which is the 12-ounce beverage, and then double shots for everything else. And then I think the only thing that ever got a triple was if someone asked for a triple, or I think a venti iced caramel macchiato, which would be a 20-ounce iced latte beverage. That was the only drink, not even like a regular iced latte, I don't think, got 3 shots. It was just the venti iced caramel macchiato that got 3 shots. So a lot of people think that bigger drink equals more coffee. It's not true. Bigger drink equals more milk with the same amount of coffee. So I whenever I talk about espresso drinks with people, or explain espresso drinks to people, I like to talk about it in ratios, and then kind of find the ratio that fits that person's preferences. So a lot of people, when they come to espresso drinks, the only drink they've really ever had is a latte, or latte macchiato, which is effectively, we're just going to call it a latte. And lattes are usually a double shot of espresso. In most coffee shops, almost every coffee shop is going to be a double shot of espresso. So it's about 2 ounces of espresso, and then anywhere from 10 to 15 to 20 ounces of milk on top of it, with some syrup to take up some of that volume. So that's the only thing that most people tried, and the only thing that most people know. So that's what their taste preferences lean towards. Is I like to call it sweet and milky. So if you were a customer walking up to me at let's say I own a cafe, you walk up to me, I'm working the register at my cafe, you're like, hey, I don't really know what to order. You have fancy names for all these things. What should I get? I would say, do you want something sweet or not sweet? Do you want something hot or cold? Do you like lots of milk, or would you like to have less milk? Would you like it to taste more like coffee or less like coffee? Those are kind of like the probing questions that I ask people, because that will kind of get me towards what they like, and most people like the sweet and milky. So one thing I like to say when I worked at a coffee shop was that vanilla lattes keep the doors open, and it's because they really do. You sell a lot of vanilla lattes because they're tasty and they're inoffensive, and people like them. I like them from time to time. It's very, very rare that I'll ever drink a vanilla latte, but sometimes you just gotta hanker in for that sweet, hot, milky, and it hits the spot.
Yeah, who doesn't? Even babies.
Yeah, even babies love the sweet, hot, and milky. And then as you kind of go down from there, what'd you say?
I said let's not use that though. What they drink in coffee.
Yeah. Yeah, so, as moving smaller from the latte, every coffee shop kind of calls it something different. So I'm gonna just call it what I call it. And you can have kind of a big latte and a small latte. So that'll be like a 16 ounce and a 12 ounce, or some cafes will do a 12 ounce and an 8 ounce latte. But essentially, the ratio is around 1 part coffee, 1 part espresso to like 4, 5, 6 parts milk. So that's a pretty diluted drink. And then the next step down would really be the cappuccino. And the cappuccino in itself has, there's controversy about like what it should be or how you should make it. It's just the name I use for a coffee beverage that's around 1 part espresso to 2 parts milk. It's my favorite, my personal favorite, as far as coffee drinks go. Um,
Yeah,
espresso
cappuccino.
is yeah, I like cappuccinos. I
Yeah,
like
it's like on
dry
the middle
6 ounce
end.
cappuccinos. Yeah, it's kind of like in the middle. It's like not super milky, but it's also not the most coffee forward thing. And in the morning, drinking something that's kind of warm and milky is really nice. So whenever I would open at Zinc, when I worked at a cafe called Zinc, the very first thing I would do after I dial in the coffee is I would make myself a cappuccino, and then I would just stand there and watch the sunrise and drink my cappuccino.
That sounds
And it
nice.
was nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's the trade off to waking up at 4:30 in the morning,
of
or
course.
whenever I was waking up. Um,
Yeah.
so
I
yeah,
was gonna
you get
say,
that.
yeah. What?
No, no, you can go.
Oh, I was just saying, yeah. You were talking a little bit about your time at Zinc. Did you want to go on to the next topic about like where, when we started getting into consuming and making coffee?
Yeah, let me. Yeah, I'll get into that after I kind of talk about
Oh,
the
that's
the
fine.
other, the other two coffee beverages, or the other three, I guess.
I'm
So
excited.
yeah, you get cappuccino. It's about 1 to 2 coffee to milk, and then you get what's this is kind of popularized in specialty shops called the cortado or the Gibraltar. Every shop calls it something different. It's different on the West Coast and versus the Midwest versus the East Coast, but it's a 1 to 1 coffee to milk drink, so it's about 2 ounces of coffee to 2 ounces of steamed milk. That's a very coffee forward beverage, and generally is for someone on the go, just like drinking a straight espresso is. And then you have the macchiato, which you mentioned, which is just a single or a double shot of espresso with a little bit of milk foam on top of it. So it's a pretty much just espresso with a little bit of milk to take the edge off. So those are like the popular drinks that you'll find in a cafe. That's most espresso preparations. And then you'll find pour overs. Coffee shops will list like what coffees they're doing as pour overs for like single origin coffees. Um, Single origin meaning it's coffee from one farm in one place, one farm, and then roasted to brew as a filter coffee. And then there will be various cold coffees. A lot of coffee shops are doing cold brew now, or iced coffee, and then iced lattes, that kind of stuff. And then you have some coffee shops kind of experimenting and trying to figure out different ways to make kind of like seasonal menu drinks and stuff that are pretty cool. So yeah, specialty coffee is a wide world to explore, and there's a lot of different ways that people are making coffee now. That's really cool and really tasty. Yeah. So yeah, the next section on preferences. So
Oh,
what?
I was gonna say, preferences is gonna be after the when we
Oh, the
started
last one.
consuming and making. Yeah. So just so that people, because it's more just about us.
Yeah, yeah.
Um. All right. But did you have anything else you'd like to say about the previous topic, or would you like to just hop right into it?
No, we can move into
All
it.
right.
So
Awesome.
so
I was just gonna say, when we started consuming slash making coffee,
mhm.
I wanted to start first just because I know Neil's gonna have a lot to say about the his his consuming slash making coffee. So
Yeah.
I was just gonna say that I mean I'm pretty young, I'd say, and I haven't
Mhm.
really drank that much coffee. When I was like, I guess in like high school, that's when I started. I got those. We had this vending machine at the
Yeah.
school that was like a Dunkin'. donuts,
Oh,
iced
nice.
coffee, little cup, yeah, a little ice, and I loved those, and I still like those.
Yeah.
Those are pretty good. I still think that they're pretty good. Nowadays I drink more like Starbucks, but yeah, I
Hmm.
mean, I drank, some stuff when we went over to Melissa and Neil's house around 2018. That's when I started
Hmm.
drinking a little bit more coffee, and I remember, going to uh, when I went to a food place for like breakfast or something, I would get coffee. Sometimes I would still get chocolate milk, but coffee at a diner is always nice unless
Hmm.
they don't care, which some of them don't.
Some of them
Um,
don't, but
yeah,
some diners
and
make diner coffee is kind of its own category almost. It's like there's like comfort in that like really heavy ceramic mug and like that pot of coffee that's been there for like an hour or two, but and it's like scalding hot, but like sometimes it's just like what you want. It
yeah,
just feels
definitely.
right.
I'd say, I mean, I usually just drank, from the Keurig,
Hmm.
which I still think it's pretty good. Mainly it's just because it's there, and uh,
Convenient.
I think, yeah, and I think it's pretty good. I think it's definitely better than just the stuff you would put in back then with the Folgers or something like that. I don't think it's
Yeah.
like equivalent. I think it's still better than that, but definitely not as good as like going to like a a specialty signature cafe. But
Hmm.
it's pretty good. And then I'd say recently, I think it was around 2022. It was an inciting incident, let's say. I was just thinking, hey, I like getting the grande chocolate milk, no ice, no cream at Starbucks and the old
Hmm.
fashioned donut. But at the same time, I want to get into drinking coffee. Which, is not the best for me because I just drink too much. But I went to, like, I think I actually got it on Postmates the first time I got it, and I got
Nice.
a grande mocha, and it was
Oh,
really good.
nice.
It
Yeah.
was really good.
That's.
I've been drinking those. What's up?
I was gonna say, are you getting them from Starbucks?
Yeah, they're really good.
Yeah, that's literally. So if you ordered a chocolate milk, it's they're literally gonna put mocha sauce in milk, which,
Yeah.
by the way, another big props to Starbucks. Their mocha sauce is actually really really good. I read the ingredients list on the bags when I'd make them. It's literally cocoa powder and sugar, and then like one thing in there as like a stabilizer or something to make sure it doesn't chunk up. But it's literally like really high quality and tastes really good. So you order chocolate milk, it's just mocha sauce and milk, and then you order a mocha, it's mocha sauce and milk, and then the only thing they add to that is espresso. So it's like your same like drink that you love, but with coffee, which is kind of
Yeah,
cool.
and it's really good. I couldn't even tell because I feel like they put in more more they put more chocolate in there. There's no
They
way.
might, yeah, they might.
It
I can't remember the recipes anymore, but I think
it's really strong,
whatever. Yeah,
and that's
it's
what I
very
like.
chocolatey.
And yeah, so I drank those recently, not too recently, but I remember getting a macchiato, but just switching
Nice.
it out with you know, mocha sauce, and
Hmm.
that was basically I felt like that was actually a stronger version. I do
Hmm.
think that their macchiato is definitely like probably weaker than most macchiatos, but at the same time or just has more like milk in there, but at the same
Hmm.
time just regular mochas, they they definitely have more milk in there. I do think macchiatos are a little, I could tell that it was like,
Yeah.
whoa, what is this? Taste the bean juice.
Hmm.
So, and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
oh, what's up?
Oh no, I was just agreeing with you. That
Oh,
is yeah, that's how it goes.
yeah, and then what was the other thing? Oh yeah, and then I think recently, which was not a good idea, but sure. I
Give it a
got
shot.
a quad. I got a quad venti mocha,
Nice.
which is delicious.
Nice.
I know, and everyone
Man.
tells me to stop, but it won't.
You know,
One
that's
oh, yeah, what's up?
I was gonna say that's kind of that's an interesting evolution of like beverages that you're trying, because like the if you just order like like a taller grande mocha, and then you order a quad venti mocha, that's I think that is pushing it a little bit more coffee than milk there, but that's almost it's almost keeping that same like coffee to milk ratio. as the smaller size. I think I could be wrong though.
Yeah. Well, I just wanted to, try it out, and it's good, and I'm planning to do it again. My worst
Nice.
memory I'd say with coffee, is that when I was like 29, yeah, it was probably 2019. I was stuff wasn't going too right for me, but there was just this day where I decided to drink 4 cups of coffee at
Oh
11
my
o'clock
gosh.
in the
Yeah.
morning, 11 o'clock at
Oh.
night, not in the morning.
Oh no.
And I don't know what happened, but after that, just for 2 months, I don't know if it was the coffee or if it was just life at that time, but I was kind of, I'd say, the most sad I've been, and that was
Mm,
weird because I was sleeping a lot, and I was like,
yeah.
I felt weird around that time. So that was,
Yeah.
I think, around the time where I was like, do I really want coffee? But then it changed to me like, yes, I want coffee, but that won't
Nice.
ever happen again because I think that might have just been other things, and then the coffee, I was like, it happened right after the coffee, so it must have been,
Yeah.
but I don't know.
Yeah,
It
or it
could have
could have
been
just been
anything.
like a contributing thing, like over consuming caffeine. Like
Because I
no
think I
matter if it's
stopped right
tea
after
or
that.
yeah, no matter if it's tea or anything else, if you overconsume caffeine, it can make you feel absolutely horrible.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
I've got my own stories in call of like being in college and drinking way 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 too much coffee to like get a paper done or trying to pull an all nighter or whatever, and like it gets to a point where you're just like pumping caffeine in your body and
Yeah.
it's not actually helping you stay awake. It's just making your body feel worse and worse and worse, where like it's like piquing your anxiety and like you're having like small anxiety or panic attacks.
Mhm.
Like it's just not a good time. So
I definitely like coffee
like
for
all
its caffeine.
yeah, no, I mean that's the main reason why people start to consume it. Um, other than it. I'll say it this way: people don't start drinking coffee because they think it tastes good. Most people think coffee tastes like crap when they first try it, because, like I said earlier, it's a bitter drink, and in our culture, in our society, bitter things are have a negative value associated with them, um, and they are not so common and not so widespread.
Mhm.
So things that are bitter or bitterness is talked about with a negative connotation, whereas I've kind of as I've gotten into different beverages, I kind of got into beer and like different like alcohol spirits or coffee and tea. Um, Bitterness is just as far as beverages go. Bitterness is just kind of a component. It's just one of the tastes, one of the flavors, and there can be good bitterness and there can be bad bitterness, and it can be balanced with things. So, um, uh, but it is something that is less pleasurable to experience than sweetness. So like eating candy versus like drinking coffee as a child. That's kind of like an extreme example, but um, yeah, most people don't start drinking coffee because they like the taste of it. They start drinking coffee because they need the caffeine in it,
Yeah.
and
I mean,
they're not in. We're Americans, so we're not super into tea. There are people who get into tea or only drink iced tea. Like I have friends who don't drink coffee and they drink exclusively like just like regular iced tea. Um, but you know, different strokes for different folks, I guess. But yeah, that's it's cool to hear your kind of your coffee journey and like where it all started for you and kind of where you've ended up. It sounds like you're kind of like in the middle of the journey that I took.
yeah,
So
I would like you
I'll
to start off with that.
yeah,
Yeah.
let's go there. So my very very earliest experiences of coffee, and I don't count this as part of my coffee journey, but this is definitely exposure. Was growing up, my mom, um, she still drinks coffee this way, and now it kind of is nasty to me, but she always makes her coffee by microwaving a mug of water and putting in
Delicious.
two heaping teaspoons of Folgers, the standard bog standard red label Folgers instant coffee, and then adds anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4. It used to be equal artificial sweeteners, but now she uses Splenda. Um, and
I
that
can't wait
is
to.
my mom's idea of coffee. My mom is a very smart person. She is wonderful, but like every human being, there are blind spots, and I'm trying to be as nice as possible to my mom. Like
Hopefully she
every
won't
human being, they
listen.
have blind spots, and she sees coffee more, and she grew up with coffee, more as a utility or almost pure utility. Whereas my journey with coffee, and it's almost like kind of your journey with coffee might turn into, is I've approached coffee from a um, kind of like a hobbyist perspective, or like a I want to say enjoyment, but enjoyment is not the right way to describe it. It's like my mom drinks coffee to get caffeine in her body. I drink coffee now because I want to enjoy the coffee, and I also need to get caffeine in my body. So like the caffeine thing, the utility for me is secondary to the enjoying of coffee. Um, I had there's this nice say that a bad no coffee is better than bad coffee, and I really mean that. Like if like you were saying with like diners who don't care about coffee, sometimes they make really bad coffee, and if I order coffee at a diner or a restaurant, if I'm at that point, and I take a sip of it and it really is just bad coffee, I just won't drink it. Like I would just I'll wait until I'm done at that place, and then I'll just go get coffee somewhere else. Oftentimes I'll just go to Starbucks because, like I said earlier, Starbucks isn't the best coffee in the world, but it's okay. It's pretty good, and it's consistent. So I know that if I go to Starbucks, pretty much anywhere in the world, anywhere that I would be, I know what to order. I know the things that I like at Starbucks, and if I order them, they will taste the same. So that's kind of the thing. So my mom sees coffee as like this caffeine delivery system to her body, and I see coffee as something that you think about and you taste and you enjoy, and there's different flavors and tasting notes and different experiences to be had there. And part of the different experiences are the cafes you get to visit, or the people you get to run into, or the people you get to connect with. But that was really my first exposure of coffee. Is my mom making instant coffee. She'd always ask me to make her coffee for her because she didn't want to go downstairs, so she'd yell at me and send me because I'm the child. So that's kind of what you get for being a kid.
Yeah.
And I would make coffee, and then I would sometimes make coffee like that for myself because I was like, oh, this is what coffee is. I might as well try it like that. And it was palatable because there's so much artificial sweetener in it that it just tastes like sweetness. If I drank that now, I would just be absolutely horrified and disgusted. And I'm like, just imagining it, I can't. I don't know if I'd be able to drink more than a sip of it. But that's how my mom likes her coffee. My dad drinks black coffee, and he was kind of like the person who in my life who drank black coffee that made me think drinking black coffee could be okay. So other than my mom's nasty instant Folgers as a child, I'd had coffee here or there. I'd had like frappuccinos from Starbucks, caramel frappuccinos, which do technically have coffee in them, but like not very much. But they are coffee flavored milkshakes, and they're delicious. I had those kind of growing up in like middle school, but kind of same for me. High school was really the time where I decided to just like start drinking coffee. And I don't know why that's almost like a common age for people to make that decision for themselves. I mean, you just kind of said that in your journey as well. Like it was around the high school years where you're like, oh, I'm gonna drink coffee, and that's almost like what it was for me. It's like it's time I start drinking coffee. So I did what anyone would do, and I found a drink at Starbucks that I liked, and that was the iced caramel macchiato. So I started off drinking venti iced caramel macchiatos. Man, it was almost like every
Every
day.
day.
It was almost every day. And back then they were like still only $5. Now they're like $7. But $5 10 years ago or 15 years ago was probably $7 now. But like I was drinking those every day. It's sweet, it's milky, it's coffee. It was kind of like that stepping stone that I needed, I guess. And then there was a point at which I think it was after I graduated high school. I was going to community college. I was like, it's time to start drinking black coffee. And I don't know why, I just thought I had to. But I started drinking, what do you call it? Black coffee from Starbucks because, Starbucks was my local Connect coffee. I wasn't going to gas stations or anything. So instead of getting iced caramel macchiatos, I was getting venti coffees. Which, if you order a venti coffee from Starbucks, they give you their like standard house blend, which is Pike Place blend, which is, they call it a medium roast. It's not. It's very dark, and the way that it's brewed is much more concentrated than I prefer my brewed filter coffee to be. I don't know the exact ratio because whenever I worked at Starbucks, you use volumetric scoops instead of like scales to make the coffee. So you just like do 2 scoops, and like my 2 scoops could be different than someone else's 2 scoops, depending on how did that scoop is. So you take 2 scoops out of this bucket of coffee beans, and then you put it in the grinder, and you grind it fresh, which is good. Grinding fresh is like a big deal for good quality coffee. But it's just way too concentrated for my taste now. But back then I was like, well, this is what black coffee is. Starbucks is good coffee. This is their black coffee. This is just what I have to drink. So I ended up switching to venti pikes at some point. I don't even remember. But that was kind of like my first. I would say that was like my start on the journey of coffee, and that was probably 14 years ago, 15 years ago for me now. So long time. And I drank those every day. I would get coffee on the way to class, or I'd just wake up and drive down to Starbucks and get coffee, and then go do whatever I had to do for the rest of the day. And back when I was buying venti pikes, they were nice and cheap. They were like $1.97. They're nowhere near that cheap now. I think they're $3 or 3 and change, which is a bummer. But I drank those for a few years, and then I had into probably a couple random coffee shops, maybe like precursors to specialty shops in that time, but I didn't know what they were. So whenever I would go there, I would just get like a cup of black coffee, or something equivalent to a Starbucks caramel macchiato. So essentially just like a sweet big latte kind of deal. And back then I wasn't really paying much attention, and I couldn't tell the difference between like a specialty cup of coffee and then like a Starbucks cup of coffee. The thing that was like a major event for me, the thing that was like the turning point for me after I started drinking black coffee was actually at Undergrounds, which was doesn't exist anymore really in its old form, but it was the coffee shop in the basement of the church I was going to at the time. I was volunteering there, and they were getting their coffee from kind of like a local bulk roaster that was like specialty, kind of like they did like bulk blend roasting. They didn't have any cafes, they just did roasting, and they would sell to like coffee shops that didn't want to roast, so like operations like this. They would do like bulk blends, and they would do some single origin stuff. So I was volunteering there with a guy who I was a buddy with. His name was Keenan, and he put in an order for a naturally processed Ethiopian coffee from the Sidama region, which is a very popular region of Ethiopia for naturally processed coffees to come out of. And what he did one day was he made a pour over in a pour over vessel called a Chemex, which is a very popular thing. It was developed by a German chemist, I think, in the 50s or 40s, as like the perfect cone or perfect brewer for coffee. And the unique thing, or the thing that sets the Chemex apart, is the filters that you use for it are very, very thick, so they result in a very I call it like a clean cup of coffee, but what I mean by that is the coffee that you get out of it has like a very light mouthfeel, so it filters out a lot of the coffee particles that you might get through on like the opposite end of the spectrum be like a French press, which has only like a metal screen on it. You get a lot of coffee particles on you can kind of feel them on your tongue, so the coffee feels a little bit more like thick, or like has kind of like a bigger mouthfeel. Chemex has a very clean light mouthfeel. But he made me this pour over, and I was already into black coffee at the time. I couldn't tell what tasting notes were. I didn't know what different coffees could taste like. I thought all coffee kind of just generally tasted the same. It just tasted like kind of, black sludgy coffee taste, which I was used to and I was fine with. But when I took a sip of this coffee, when I drank it for the first time, it was literally a life-changing moment for me. It was like a light bulb turning on moment, like you see in a cartoon, like where a character like has an idea and a light bulb like pops up above their head. It's literally that moment for me with coffee. And I took my first sip of this coffee, and it tasted like blueberry pancakes or blueberry muffins. I can't remember exactly what it was.
Without any cream or sugar?
Oh yeah, it was just straight black coffee. That's it. And it tasted like the flavor, the blueberry flavor of, and like is blueberry baked goods. I can't remember exactly what it was. But like that flavor in that cup of coffee was so overpowering and so just like extremely like crazy to me that I was like, my mind was blown. It was like a light bulb went off, a door had been opened that had been welded shut before. Like this whole world was open to me now that I didn't know. I'm looking back in retrospect, I know what's there now, but like that was like my first taste of what specialty coffee could be, and it set me on a hunt for that coffee. I've chased that cup of coffee, that same experience forever, and it'll never happen. It's like that first cup is always going to be that first cup. It's always going to be.
You've had a second cup and it wasn't as good?
No, I've had coffee from the same region. I've made it myself, and it's as like the coffee is as good, but it just doesn't hit it doesn't hit the same. There was actually I take it back. There was only one other coffee I've ever had since that moment that kind of hit the same way, or like almost was like very close to the same experience, like that same baked like blueberry cakey, pancakey, waffly, like just warming flavor note. And that was a coffee from a roaster called Clatch there in Southern California. And it was a coffee from Panama from the Alita estate, and it was also a naturally processed coffee. I did not expect that coffee to taste that way, but it did. And it reminded me of this, this event of Keenan making me this blueberry coffee out of his Chemex, and that was really the cup of coffee that kind of changed things for me. And like I said, it kind of set me on this journey. After that cup of coffee, this was in like 2009 or 2010, by the way. So like at this point in the specialty coffee world, specialty cafes just don't exist. They're like very few and far between. They're really only going to be in Seattle, San Francisco, LA, Chicago, New York, and like pretty much nowhere else. Like there's specialty coffee shops are popping up every now and then in big cities, like smaller big cities like St. Louis and Kansas City, which are like, I'm mentioning those because I live near them. But like you couldn't just drive down the road for 5 miles and find a really good specialty cafe like you can now in most big cities. Back then, I like and like Google and the internet, like iPhones weren't a thing. Google Maps was still kind of in development. Google itself as a search engine was still in development, so it was kind of hard to find. And I didn't even know the terminology to use to like find a coffee shop like this. So I spent so much time whenever I would be driving. So shortly after this, I left to move out to the Midwest to go to college. So there were a couple years where I would drive to and from Southern California and Southwest Missouri to go to school. So on that drive, I would make stops to get gas or make stops at places and try to find a coffee shop somewhere. If I was like in a new city, try to find a coffee shop that served coffee like this. And it just like, it never happened for me. Like I found cafes that were doing cool things, but I'd never found a place that was doing something like that cup of coffee. So while, for probably a few years, my only experience of specialty coffee, probably from like 2009 to let's say 2014 or 2015, so 5-6 years, my only experience of specialty coffee was when I would take trips into the city when I was living into LA, when I was living in Southern California, and I would go to places like Blue Bottle or a coffee shop called Handsome Coffee that was bought out by Blue Bottle. Rest in peace, Handsome Coffee. It was a wonderful coffee shop, beautiful location in the Arts District in LA. It's now a Blue Bottle location. I'm sure it still makes good coffee because Blue Bottle makes good coffee. Or going to Blue Bottle in San Francisco. I went to Ritual in San Francisco, and I took a family trip to Seattle in 2014. I went to a couple of coffee shops there. Made it a point to stop at the coffee shops. Went to Slate Coffee Roasters and a couple other places. But like those cafes that I mentioned, like Blue Bottle and Ritual, Blue Bottle's been around they're one of the granddaddies of the specialty coffee industry, or specialty coffee like era. They've been around since the early 2000s. There's another coffee shop called Intelligentsia that is from Chicago. They've been around for a while, 20 plus years. Ritual, I mentioned, is a San Francisco-based roaster. They're very niche. They're kind of like that stereotype of snooty coffee, like specialty coffee people who are like really like, we really don't want you to put cream in this coffee. We're not going to give you cream for your coffee kind of thing. They're not like that, but like that's kind of like the vibe. But like, in 5 years, I had maybe a dozen like really great specialty coffee experiences as I just kind of like chased that experience until I found a way to make specialty coffee at home, which was to buy a high quality burr grinder, which I did. I don't recommend people do this, but after Melissa and I got married, once you get married, you essentially don't become a dependent of your parents anymore. So as for like federal tax purposes, you're broke, especially if you're a college student. So when you apply for student loans, you are also eligible for student loan like grant money too, depending on like whatever you're doing if you're full time. So I took some of my grant money one year and I spent $500 of it on a coffee grinder, which I still have. And still make coffee with today. I think this was back in like 2014, 2015. Mm-hmm. I bought this coffee grinder to make pour-overs at home, and that was kind of like my way to get specialty coffee into my life, and it worked. Like I was buying coffee from roasters. I was like, buying coffee online from roasters. This was kind of the time where I had that coffee from Klatch that hit, was like almost the same as that first coffee experience. But I was buying coffee from wherever I could order coffee from. And I was making pour-overs every day before class. And it was really just kind of that ritualistic wake up, spend 15 minutes making a cup of coffee, 10, 15 minutes making a cup of coffee, slowing down, taking time in the morning, to do something nice for myself before I go to class. And it really became like this thing that I loved in my life. And it really became this thing that I cherished and, shared with other people. Like there were other people, that I knew in college that started to get into coffee as well. And I kind of like, I don't know if I was the guy who like kind of made coffee a thing at my school. I went to a very small school. It was like 600, 700, 800 students, college students at a time. So it was a very small school. I don't know if I was the guy who made coffee like a thing, but I'm pretty sure that I was, because I was really the only person I knew who was making pour-overs and bringing in the class. And whenever I would find out about like another student who would like, they bought a gooseneck kettle and they bought a hand grinder and they're making pour-overs in their dorm, I found out about every single one of those students after I started doing it, and it kind of exploded on our campus. And 2014, 2015, it really became like coffee was like a thing that people were getting into, and that was also the time. yeah, they were just following in my footsteps. I think really like for 2014, 2015 was really the time, even in the U.S., where specialty cafes were starting to open up at a greater pace, and more and more people were creating demand for that kind of thing. So after that, I was making pour overs in my apartment, and then one day I was on Instagram trying to find coffee shops to go to, because that's like what I used Instagram for back then. And I found out about Onyx Coffee Lab, and they were in Fayetteville, Arkansas, which is around where I live now. But Fayetteville from where I was living at the time was about almost a 2-hour drive. So I wrangled up 4 of my buddies and said, "Hey, let's take this field trip to this coffee shop that looks really sick and give it a shot." And I took that trip to Onyx, and man, I was blown away by the coffee, by the service, the quality of service from the staff, just the vibes of the coffee shop were really dope. So that let me know, oh, hey, there's a specialty shop down the highway for me that I can go to semi-regularly. And I did. So me and a few of my buddies went there the first time, and then pretty much after that first trip to Onyx, man, I probably went there at least once a month up to 3 to 4 times a month after that day in 2014 or 2015, essentially until I moved closer. And actually, ironically, after I've moved here, I go there almost never, which is so weird. But that was like, oh, I found this cafe that's like down the road, down the highway. It's an hour and a half. They opened a coffee shop that was a little bit closer in farther a closer city. So I was able to get Onyx more regularly. So that kind of drove the commuting to Onyx more. But back in 2017, I had an opportunity to open a coffee shop in Joplin, Missouri, where I was living at the time, and that coffee shop is called Zinc Coffee. It's still there. I don't work there anymore, obviously. I've kind of talked about it in past tense, but that was like, I was working somewhere at the time that I was like, I needed a full-time job, and I was part-time, and I couldn't go full-time, and I was like hankering for the specialty coffee industry. I was like, man, I really want to work with my hands. I really want to work in coffee. I want to do this as my job. And I had an opportunity to help open a coffee shop. So, I was then what I still am today, and that is a home barista. I don't consider myself necessarily a professional, but I'm a big nerd, and I get big and nerdy into things. So, I kind of get that way about stuff, and I figured out how to help open a coffee shop and make it function somewhat decently. In retrospect, I could have done a lot of things differently, and that experience could have gone, differently for the layout of the shop and how the cafe was kind of structured and set up. But I don't really know what else I would have done. I can't go back and know what I know after it's done. So, I did what I knew how to do and set up the cafe that way. And, it was a very good experience for me. It was a fun time. I got to work with people that, I absolutely love and adore. And, I was the manager. There were a couple business owners, and then I was the manager like day to day. And then I had an assistant manager who still runs the shop. His name's John. One of the best people I've ever met in my life. He's amazing.
Yeah, 2 good Johns.
2 good Johns. He's a great dude. Still works there, still runs it. But now the entire staff is people that I've never knew. People I didn't hire. So it's still a cool place. It's one of like 3 or 4 specialty shops that are in Joplin now. Ironically, whenever we opened, we were one of 4 shops that were opening all at the same time, so that was a bit frustrating. I thought we would have a bit of a corner on the market. Yeah, it had a lot of competition, so that kind of spread the demand for specialty really, really thin in our market. And that market is very old school as far as like coffee culture goes. And the socioeconomically, Joplin is like lower class to lower middle class. So, presenting people with a $5 or $6 coffee drink is offensive to them, to a lot of people who like come in just like, oh, it's a place to get coffee. A lot of people complained and cussed at me, but that kind of comes with the territory. You're introducing this new way of doing something to people who've been doing it their way for their whole lives. People spend $1 for a cup of coffee at the gas station on their way to work, and they decide to stop at my place, and my coffee's $4. So they're like, "What the hell?" And they drink it, and they don't think it's $4 worth of coffee. They think it's they think it's trash. So that was my big foray into specialty coffee, is helping open a cafe. And we actually became an account for Onyx. We were a white label account, so they were roasting coffee, and we were putting our brand on it. They had that as a program. They might still. I haven't talked to them about it in a long time. So with that also came training, and they have state-of-the-art training equipment and labs. So I got to get trained by some people at Onyx, which was really, really cool. I've seen the inner workings of their business from the coffee preparation and roasting side. I don't know how they run their business specifically, but it kind of was a way to become more familiar with that. Like coffee shop is a business, and as a cafe that you visit. And now when I visit, they have so many staff, and the people that I knew back when I was getting trained by them. One of them, actually, a few of them aren't there anymore, and the one that I know that is still there, we aren't like super good friends. So, and he doesn't work in the coffee shops. He's like in education and development and stuff. So,
okay.
So yeah, that kind of brings me to the modern era of my coffee journey. I did kind of skip a big part, and that was I don't know. It kind of fits in. Back when I graduated from college in 2016, I bought an espresso machine with my graduation present. Dropped lots of money on this thing, and that was really where my love of espresso came. So 2014, 20 whatever, I bought a grinder, and I was making pour overs at home. And then 2016, after I graduated college, I bought an espresso machine. I got to make espresso drinks at home. So I really was able to bring that specialty coffee experience back into my home, into my life. And one of the absolute best things about that time in my life, that 2016 to I'd say 2020 era, kind of before COVID, is I always loved to share coffee with other people. When people would, friends would come over, friends would bring their friends over, be like, "Dude, this guy's got this sick espresso machine. You gotta like have a drink from him." And like I would make people drinks, and like I would just love it because people were cheesing on my setup because they were getting a cafe quality drink in my kitchen, in my apartment kitchen. I just live in some random 2-bedroom apartment in Joplin, and I kind of used coffee as a way to connect with people, and I still use coffee as a way to connect with people. I mean, we're connecting right now because of coffee. If I was never into coffee, I'm sure you would ask me about something else that I'm into, but it's
like Baldur's Gate or something.
Yeah, gaming. It has always provided the opportunity to connect on a deeper level with people, and that's really what I think coffee's all about. It's about making connections. It's about building relationships and getting to know people around you, and using it as a tool. Coffee isn't the end. It's not like all I'm doing is trying to get to the best cup of coffee or like having a great cup of coffee.
The journey there.
It's who you meet along the way, and how you guys get to connect, or how you get to build a relationship. There's some people I've met because of coffee, because I worked at Zinc, or because I trained at Onyx or whatever, and I knew those people for a short amount of time, but regular customers, trainers, that kind of stuff, that are just like such cool people that I never would have got to meet otherwise. And I'll remember those people forever, and remember them fondly. I'm just thinking of one of my regulars at Zinc. Her name is Stella. She always got the same thing. She always got the same 2 drinks. She always got a vanilla latte with oat milk, or a matcha latte with oat milk. Stella is, as far as I know, still a regular at Zinc, and she goes in almost every day, and it was kind of strange at first because she would always bring like one or two of her children, uh, but like it was always different children, like always different kids, and I was like, who is this lady bringing here? And some of them were like in their 20s, so I was like, is that her boyfriend? But she's like middle aged, she's like in her 40s or 50s. So we had no idea. And then one day John asked her, she's like, hey, who are you bringing here? And she's like, oh, it's all my kids. I have 12 kids. She was bringing her 12 kids through, 1, 2, 3 at a time to get hot chocolates or lattes at Zinc. And she was just such a nice person. Like, she's just, smiling, radiant, wonderful, kind. And she always just like hung out. It was like cool to see her. So like those kinds of like stories, I couldn't tell you that story if I never worked at Zinc, and I would have never worked at Zinc if I didn't love coffee. And
that's good. I mean, this is a great ending, but we should really talk about our preferences because I know we all
Yeah.
have different preferences. Thankfully, I don't think this
We
one's
do.
gonna be too long.
No.
I like this thing called very sweet coffee. A lot of cream, a lot of sugar. One thing
Yeah.
recently, I've been doing, because my dad got it. Because I don't for cream, it's like it doesn't make it sweeter, in my like
Yeah.
unless it's like sweetened cream. So
Yeah.
my dad bought recently like Coffee Mate, and I thought, I mean, I like the flavored one. It's cool, but the one that I feel like kind of not keeps the flavor of the I mean, I think it keeps most of the flavor of the coffee, but it's really sweet and I like it. The Italian cream, it's really
Hmm.
good. It's very sweet,
Yep.
and I like just putting sugar in there. Sometimes I do honey, and that
Oh, nice.
makes it different. So, but yeah, I mean, another coffee preference of mine, I guess, just getting it from like already packaged or whatever. And I bet you hate the.
Hmm.
I mean, not bet, but like you probably don't like them as much as like regular coffee. But um, I think they're really good. Like the
I try not to hate too much. I mean, I would like to say my palate is like kind of refined, so I'll try anything in the coffee as far as coffee goes, and some things are better than others. I'll just say it that way. But you got to do what you got to do. Like if I'm on a road trip and I have no coffee with me and I got to stop by a gas station and get coffee, or like buy a refrigerated coffee drink, like bottle of cold brew or something, like I do that. I'm not above anything except for a bad cup of coffee.
exactly.
Like I was
Um,
saying earlier.
but I was just saying, yeah. I mean, like I like the other ones. To be honest, I like Starbucks more than Dunkin' Donuts. But I think
Oh,
where
nice.
they go wrong is I don't think they're like the products you can buy at like the store, like the glass bottles. I
Hmm.
don't think they're as good as the Dunkin' ones that they sell at the
Ah, the
store. That's just
merch.
like plastic. Yeah, like theirs is I think a lot better, like the Dunkin', because I
Yeah.
don't know what it is,
Hmm.
but I think it just tastes a lot better. And then theirs is fine. It's just like I don't know. Maybe it's the sweetness or maybe it's the consistency. I don't know, but it
Mm.
definitely is better. I think the Dunkin' Donuts one than the Starbucks one. But I would rather go to a real Starbucks than a Dunkin' Donuts. I
Yeah.
gotta say. I know this guy told me that before he goes to Disneyland, he always goes to Dunkin' Donuts and gets some
Interesting.
donuts. And I went there and got coffee, and I was like, it's pretty good. I mean, it's not like that good.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'd rather go to like a nice donut place, maybe get some coffee. You have to agree with me, Neil.
Hmm.
Coffee, donuts, good combo. No one's
Delicious combo.
debating.
One of the
Yeah.
OG morning combos. Hard to beat. Fried bread covered in sugar with coffee. I mean, I don't know, you can't really go wrong. I love
Yeah.
donut.
And I
What's
mean
your
it
favorite donut?
probably like I like glazed. I like also
Yeah.
like coconut covered, and then
Oh, interesting.
yeah, the old fashioned pretty good.
Oh, yeah, that's my favorite. Is the old fashioned, like
Yeah, I
kind
know
of like
they
the
sell
crinkly
those.
looking one. The one that Starbucks sells. I think you said that
Yeah.
earlier. That you get those. Yeah, dude, those donuts, those old fashioned donuts from Starbucks are actually really, really good. Very
Yeah, I
tasty.
mean, the only thing I'd say is that they're a little sweaty, but you know what?
Yeah, they can be.
Yeah, it's all good. I'm not expecting like just got out of the oven type feel.
Yeah,
So
they're fried in a factory somewhere and then frozen and shipped. Like it's a miracle they taste as good as they do, honestly.
exactly. So yeah, I mean, I like those, and obviously the pink frosted ones pretty good.
Yeah,
So
those are tasty too. The
yeah.
Simpsons donut.
Yeah, overall, I have to say I just like it sweet, and I
Hmm.
can when it comes to consistency, I do like more of like a like you're saying like a creamy because
Yeah,
the thing is that you notice that with coffee, it just is like water, like you're saying, and it's like do you really want to just be drinking hot water? I mean, I don't know.
yeah,
So that's why I kind of like the sweet and milky
hmm
consistency and taste. So
yeah,
I would like to hear more about like what your preferences are about like coffee and espresso and just the
yeah.
main stuff so that everyone knows, how to actually drink coffee. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. So I've kind of gone through even in just like kind of talking about my journey with coffee. I've gone through different phases of like what I like or what I want, and I've kind of come out the other end and just decided that it really depends. And I know that's not like a that's not like a super easy answer, but it really depends on one, what time of day it is and how I feel about it, and two, what's available to me. So I've kind of hinted at different preferences throughout this entire podcast. But like if I'm gonna choose my daily driver, my ride or die, I think I'm going to pick a hot cup of coffee. And not a big one. I normally only like to drink about 8 ounces of coffee, eight to 10 ounces of coffee a day, and that's about
Oh,
it.
that wouldn't be
I, I
enough.
I only drink one cup of coffee a day. I have one coffee drink in the morning. I don't drink coffee in the afternoon
That's probably
anymore.
why you'll live past 60.
Yeah, I'm doing the real moderation thing. But like whenever I was your age, I was drinking like 40, 50 ounces of coffee a day, like of brewed coffee a day. Like I think people go through that phase, and I think that's okay.
Yeah.
But like I know 50-year-olds that drink, you know, half a gallon of coffee a day. I don't know if that's good
Dangerous.
for them. I don't think it's good. I think that's too much caffeine for your body, personally. But
Like
people
60
build up.
ounces of coffee. That's like insane.
That's insane. Yeah, it's an insane amount. Like
That's
that,
the thing
they'll go to a
too with
gas station,
yeah,
get
that's
a
the
big
thing is
coffee, and
that
then refill it.
yeah, I was just mainly saying was that with coffee or just any caffeine, it's good to always be have moderation. And the only reason I'd say that is that the effect is much stronger if your body is not, as tolerant to it. Like that's
Exactly.
what people
Yeah.
do when they work out. Like they make sure to not exceed a certain amount with pre-workout and stuff like that. So they
Yeah.
just
Oh man.
make sure.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
another thing to be careful on. Uh, yeah. I had a season of life where I was working out and taking pre-workout, and there were times where like I was working out
Mix some coffee
outside
in
with my
there.
buddy. Oh no. And some pre-workouts like they have caffeine in it too, so like you gotta just,
Extra
take care
caffeine.
of yourself. Take care of yourself. Love yourself. Be nice to your body.
Yeah.
So yeah, like these days, if I'm picking my ride or die, I'm gonna do a small 8 to 10 ounce cup of hot coffee. Even in the summertime, even when it's 95 and humid out, I drink a hot coffee a lot of the time if I'm making it for myself. So the form that takes now is I will either make myself a small pour over. I've been using a recipe from an Onyx guy. His name's Lance Hedrick. He has a YouTube channel. Plug for that. I guess he doesn't know me, but it's a good YouTube channel if you want to nerd out about coffee. But I saw a video of like um it's like a pour over recipe developed where it's like can't mess it up kind of thing. And I've been doing that, and it's not made like the most exceptional cups of coffees, but I have not had a bad cup. So I think he hit the nail on the head where it's a good go-to recipe that you can apply to any coffee, and it'll work. And I've been doing that, liking that. The other way I've been drinking it is I have a Cometeer subscription. Shout out, plug, sponsor us. Cometeer is a new specialty coffee um, company that they do specialty instant coffee, and the way they do that is they do bulk brewed concentrates, and they flash freeze them into pods. So they work with roasters, all around the world, very reputable, very well-known roasters, and they make their coffee to their specs, work with the roasters to make it right, and they brew it as a concentrate, and they flash freeze it into a pod, and then they ship these pods to you frozen on dry ice, and you just throw them in your freezer, and they're instant, they're convenient, they're not super cheap, but it's cheaper than going to a cafe and buying that coffee. It ends up around $2 or $2.50 a cup. And you literally just you thaw the pod, you dump it in a mug, and then I just pour 8 ounces of hot water over it, and boom, I have my hot cup of coffee. They're even sized to be usable in a Keurig, so you can pop one of these in a Keurig and just run water through it, and you'll have your cup of coffee that way too. So it's kind of amazing what they've done. Up until Cometeer, I've never had a good instant coffee, even from different specialty shops that have kind of tried to break into the instant coffee market. It just hasn't worked any other way. One that I've tried that was pretty close, deep to coffee, and they I don't know how they process the coffee or roast it and stuff, but they put it in kind of a tea bag looking thing, and you steep the coffee like a tea bag. That was pretty good, but not super great. And then there were a couple shops that tried to do the freeze dried Folgers style instant coffee that just didn't work out, or didn't take off, I guess. Especially for the cost, it's a lot more expensive and the quality isn't quite there. But with Cometeer, it is. So I've been a Cometeer subscriber for probably a year now, maybe less than a year, but it feels like it's been a part of my life forever. And it arrives. I get my 32 pods a month, and that kind of satisfies it. So that's kind of my brewed cup of coffee. If I'm gonna pick an espresso drink, I said this earlier, I'm gonna pick a cappuccino with whole milk. Side note: whenever you do go to a cafe, almost always their default milk is going to be whole milk. So if you want something other than whole milk, you're gonna have to ask for it. And they usually will not have alternatives that are less milk fat, they won't have 2% or non-fat or whatever. They'll usually have an alternative non-dairy, and thankfully oat milk is here to save the day. Oat milk is the best non-dairy milk I've ever tried. It's the closest thing in texture and steaming quality to cow's milk. And it tastes good.
What can beat cow's milk, though? Let's be real here.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing beats cow's milk.
It's literally the most healthy thing for you. You know what I'm saying?
It's so good. It's so good. It's so good. But there are lactose intolerant people.
Yeah,
so
and it's also not the best for environment. Sometimes I heard.
Yeah. Cow farming is pretty rough on the environment. So, comparatively to oat farming,
milk is worse.
Almond milk is worse as far as right now. A lot of almonds are farmed in California, and they require tons and tons of water. So it's not like this. It's not bad in the same ways, but it's just as difficult to farm as milk is. So as cow's milk is. So yeah, I'm gonna pick a cappuccino. For my go-to. What I order, when I went to Onyx last weekend, what I ordered was a Breve Cortado with the single origin espresso. So, and that's kind of my go-to at Onyx. So they always have a single origin espresso, and that kind of differs from their regular espresso in that it's kind of same thing as a single origin pour over. It's one coffee from one place. So instead of being a more balanced blend, it's the espresso will have kind of more dominant flavor notes and less dominant flavor notes and mouthfeel and texture and all that kind of stuff. So it's just a little bit more interesting. It's a little bit more, it's an upcharge. So, if you want to have a more interesting experience, you can pay for that at certain cafes. And I get it in a cortado. So that size of drink is 2 ounces of espresso to 2 ounces of milk. And instead of cow's milk, instead of whole milk, I get half and half. So the reason I'd like to do it that way is the single origin coffee is going to be, usually they pick something that's really fruity and bright and floral and kind of has big, bright, shining flavor notes. And the half and half, while there's 2 ounces of it, that's not quite enough to kind of tone it down into something that's like really enjoyable and not kind of like jarring to drink. The extra milk fat in the half and half kind of smooths everything out. And the particular single origin espresso they have right now, I think, man, I can't remember it. I'm not going to try to say it. Whatever it is, with half and half, it tastes like you're eating or drinking like something that has like a coffee that has a dark chocolate bar just melted into it. It has this like crazy like dark chocolate like bar flavor that's just like, it's super good. I've gotten it like 3 or 4 times. The last few times I've gone to Onyx. That's what I've got. But
And
like,
what drink is that?
it's a breve cortado. So cortado, Gibraltar, it can be called different things. It's small, very small drink, but with half and half. And then I always get the single origin espresso. So not replicatable, because not every cafe is going to have a single origin espresso, or if you can find one that does that, they may not necessarily have. They won't have that single origin espresso because Onyx sources and roasts their own coffee. So, that is like a good format. Like the Breve Cortado is a good format for those types of coffees as espresso, because it just makes it a little bit more palatable. It's very coffee forward. It's almost like just drinking a shot of espresso with a little bit of milk in it, because that's really what it is. But the half and half really makes it more pleasurable. And if drinking half and half sounds disgusting to you, you probably put 2 ounces of half and half in your brewed coffee anyway. So, it's just less diluted. And it's 2 ounces, it's not going to hurt you. It's just going to be really creamy. So, last thing I said, I did say it depends. And it really does depend on like the time of day, how I'm feeling, whether or not I want coffee. I mentioned that, I only drink 1 coffee a day. But there are days where I want something sweet. And usually if I drink a sweet drink, it's always going to be later in the day. That's kind of my thing, is I usually drink more coffee forward stuff in the morning, like a cup of black coffee or a cappuccino or cortado in the morning, with just milk and coffee. And if it's later in the day and I want coffee, then that's when I'll get, something like a flavored latte, or I don't know. I like matcha lattes too. That's not coffee, but that's a coffee shop thing. I do like matcha lattes. And then Starbucks. Starbucks is kind of its own category, because they're just like they're their own thing, and they're the same everywhere. So if I tell you to get this drink at Starbucks, you get it, and it's going to be the same as if I got it. I'm gonna say it. I love the Starbucks pumpkin spice thing. It's something I love. It's great. I enjoy it every season. I look forward to it every
middle-aged man
every summer.
loves it.
I know they might say they might talk smack, but it really is a wonderful thing. And the pumpkin spice drink that I like is the pumpkin cream cold brew. So that's man, it's a cold brew drink with pumpkin cold foam on it. And normally the drink has vanilla syrup in the cold brew. I sub that for pumpkin sauce. So it's like pumpkin sauce in the drink and pumpkin foam on top, and it's cold. It's a great drink. It honestly, part of why I love it, other than the fact that it's pumpkin spice, is that it reminds me of a memory of when Melissa and I went to Disney World for the first time in 2019, in the before times, before COVID happened and before Disney changed their parks, like the park experience kind of changed after that. There was one morning we were at Animal Kingdom, and it was like 3 or 4 days into the trip. We had already walked like 10 miles that week by this point, and we don't walk places, so we're like dying. Didn't get a lot of sleep. Feet were hurting. Our dog looking, and we're like, man, we need coffee. So we went to Starbucks, and we both got these pumpkin cream cold brews, and it was just like, it hit the spot, because it was Florida in September. So it was like 90 degrees, super, super hot, miserable outside at 9 a.m. And then, these cold brews, just like, they were just amazing. So every time I drink one, it just reminds me of that Disney trip. And that was such an amazing trip for us, because we were with like really good friends that we love. and got to hang out with them. So that's my Starbucks drink. If it's not pumpkin spice season and I'm going to Starbucks, I almost always just get a cold foam cold brew because you know, Starbucks does some things well, and one of the things that they brought to the coffee scene was cold foam, and it's awesome. So if you haven't tried it, you should try something with cold foam on it because it really is great. You have to like cold coffee to begin with because that's what it's gonna be on top of. But yeah, that's my Starbucks thing is cold foam cold brews, pumpkin spice if it's available. They do shaken espresso drinks now. I don't know how they make those, but I've had a couple of them. Those are good. But I still prefer the cold foam stuff, which is a little on the sweeter side for coffee drinks, but it's still a cold brew base, so it is like a concentrated cold coffee. But yeah, like my day to day, like today, did I have coffee today? I actually made myself a cappuccino this morning, which isn't typical. I haven't actually made myself a cappuccino at home in like more than a couple years, which is weird. But normally I would have had like a 8 or 10 ounce cup of coffee. So that's my thing. My last note about preferences is don't be a gatekeeper. Don't tell people how to drink coffee. There's enough people out there trying to tell people how to live their lives, and telling people how to drink their coffee is not something we should do.
We should
And
just
I don't like to do
encourage
it.
them,
Yeah,
to drink more.
yeah, and that's kind of like what it was for me. It was like obviously you run into people who are like going to be elitists and be stupid about things and say like, oh, you should do it this way, it's the only way, and they're just wrong. That's not the only way. The fact that we have places like Starbucks and places like gas stations that serve coffee and places like Onyx, they all coexist and they all have market share. Like that exists for a reason. It's because different people like different things and different people are on different parts of their coffee journey. And that's kind of how I always talked about it when I worked at Zinc and I was like training people and kind of pitching my coffee to people. Was like everyone's on a different part of their journey. So if someone wants a 16-ounce vanilla latte, make them a 16-ounce vanilla latte, but you make the best 16-ounce vanilla latte you can, and maybe they'll come back and they'll love your cafe and they'll love you, and you'll build a relationship, and maybe one day you'll suggest something else to them and they'll try something different, and that'll change their life, and that'll change their coffee preferences or their coffee journey, because that's like kind of what happened for me. It's like if I didn't know anyone who was kind of encourage me and be a connecting point to a different stepping stone on the journey, I never would have gotten to where I've gotten, which I think is a cool spot. I love coffee. It's a really cool thing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it reminded me about how like there's like this Mexican restaurant near my where I work, and sometimes when I get off early, if I get off early, I go there to get some deep fried Oreos. And of
Oh,
course I'm going to a
nice.
Mexican place to get some deep fried Oreos, but at the same time I'm like giving them business, and at the same
Yeah,
time I think they're mad chilling. I don't know
yeah.
how now think about I don't know how this really applies to coffee, because I don't know how like
Hey,
they're like, "Oh
maybe.
my gosh, I want to force my Mexican cuisine down their throats."
Hey, you never know. You'll keep going in there, and then one day you'll be like, well, maybe I should try some enchiladas because maybe they are really good. You never know.
Yeah.
Maybe
I
one day.
Yeah, maybe one day, maybe someday.
Yeah,
All right then. I think we can end it there. I was gonna ask you, Neil, did you want to
yeah,
shout anything out, or just yeah, just shout anything out, like anything you're working on, or any I guess you shouted out a lot of coffee shops, but just
yeah.
anything
Some
like that.
businesses. Yeah, like I'm not very like internet connected right now. I'm not doing anything in the media space. It's just not my thing. I've actually kind of disconnected from social media more and more as I've gotten older. I feel like that's something I inherited from my dad. My dad's kind of a hermit. He's not really on the internet and is not super great with technology, even though he's like a super smart engineer. He sucks with technology, which is fine. Everyone's good at whatever they're good at. Um, but yeah, like I'm not on. I mean, I'm on Instagram at NTSimmons, but I don't post, so that's kind of fruitless. Um, I lurk Reddit a lot, but Reddit's kind of its own thing. Um, yeah, Onyx Coffee Lab, they're a great coffee shop local to me. Love them. as far as like what they're doing in the coffee space. I don't know who else. Cometeer, yeah, Cometeer. They're doing cool things. If I can invest in that company, I will. But I don't think I can. I don't think they have. I don't think there's an opportunity for that. Because I think they're blowing up right now, and it's something I love. But I would give them more money if they gave me a way to do it, I guess is a way of saying it. Cool businesses in the coffee space. Baratza is the manufacturer of the coffee grinder that I bought, the very first piece of coffee gear I bought myself. That $500 grinder I talked about. They make cheaper grinders. I just bought a nicer one. They're a very cool company. Their stuff is manufactured overseas, but they provide tutorial videos on how to repair their stuff. So sustainability is good, repairability is good, user serviceability is 10 out of 10. Any interaction I've had with that company, ordering my stuff and customer service stuff, as far as like, hey, how do I replace this thing? Super, super cool. Wonderful people there. So if you have an opportunity to buy a coffee grinder, look at Baratza. They make really good stuff. Not the only coffee grinder company on the market, but they serve the home market specifically. And I think as far as like home grinders go, you can't really beat them. There are some people on the market now that are kind of getting into the home grinder game, but Baratza is really the OG there, and I would still support them if I could. If my grinder ever breaks, I will just I can't buy another grinder from them, because if my grinder breaks, I can just replace the part that breaks. So I can't say I'd buy it again, because I will never have to buy it again. But if I did, I would. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's my shoutouts.
All right, that's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah,
you guys will see my social medias down there. Yeah, just let me know how you feel about Neil in the comments below, and let me know if you'd like to hear from him again. And I sure do. If you guys,
for sure.
I was gonna say, guys, I think this is the longest episode. None of the
Yeah, I'm
episodes have
sorry. I talk
reached.
a lot.
It's all good. I'm not actually too bothered. It does make it interesting. So I can, just say, hey, this is the first 2 hour. How about you try to test your patience and listen to the whole thing? And I think you might, because he has some
Yeah,
good points, and he is very knowledgeable. So
yeah, appreciate that.
yeah, well, thanks for listening to this week's podcast, and you'll see
Yeah,
me
thanks for
next
having
week
me.
talking to somebody else about something else. So yeah, hope you liked this episode about coffee, and I'll see you next week. All right, bye.